Chapter 424. The Great Tribulation has been eliminated. During the course of these 3 years, the thread condensed from the formation had extended through the Yellow Springs at a speed even faster than Luo Fan's flight. After 3 years, when the changes in the heavenly mirror had completely calmed down, the thread formed by the array had extended to the extreme. It densely covered every tributary of the netherworld and reached every location of the netherworld. Every location under the untainted land had been connected by this thread, forming another huge network that relied on the netherworld, but was different from the netherworld. When the thread formed by the array had spread to every location, and the changes in the heavenly mirror had completely stabilized, the thread in the sky of the space-time illusion, which spanned across the 2 poles and divided the entire sky into 2 parts, suddenly shook and continued to extend to both sides. In the blink of an eye, it penetrated into the void. Through some extremely mysterious and profound method, it passed through the endless void and connected to the core of the netherworld, which was 4,900 miles under Buzhou Mountain. It directly connected with the thread formed by the array, which was distributed in every tributary of the netherworld, and formed a network that enveloped the entire untainted land. In an instant, infinite mysterious light was emitted from the heavenly mirror in the thread. The entire untainted land shook slightly. The mysterious light was so dazzling in the netherworld that it was almost like another sun. However, after penetrating the layers of the ground, it was changed by all kinds of strange substances in the ground. It turned into an obscure light that was invisible to the naked eye. It penetrated the ground, rose into the sky, and reached a height of hundreds of thousands of feet above the void. In an instant, in the eyes of the innate gods with extraordinary senses, the entire untainted land had undergone a huge change. An incomparably huge network formed by obscure light suddenly appeared out of thin air. Like a huge silk net, it enveloped the entire untainted land. In an instant, all the innate gods who saw this thing understood that a huge change had taken place in the untainted land just now. And the innate gods who were scattered all over the untainted land and guarding a certain area instantly felt the change in the netherworld. After all, over the years, the only way they could communicate with the outside world was through the Yellow Springs' ability to transmit information. For these innate gods who had lived in the space-time illusion for tens of thousands of years, communicating with other innate gods had long become an inseparable part of their cultivation and life. Therefore, over the years, even the most eccentric innate gods were extremely familiar with the Yellow Spring that carried their connection. Under such circumstances, how could they not think of the Yellow Springs when the obscure light that appeared out of thin air was moving in the direction of the Yellow Springs? When they thought of the Yellow Springs, those innate gods naturally understood that it was definitely the unfathomable and extraordinary Luo Fan that had done something. In the blink of an eye, there were countless thoughts and messages echoing throughout the entire Huang Quan network. The innate gods were communicating with each other through the Yellow Spring, discussing what kind of changes had happened to the Yellow Spring. These innate gods' thoughts were so fast that they had billions of thoughts in an instant. Before the obscure light disappeared, these innate gods had already discussed with each other countless times. However, the results were hazy and they could not figure out what kind of changes had happened to the Yellow Spring. Although they could communicate with each other through the Huang Quan network, it was only through a discovery that Luo Fan had passed on. They knew how it was, but they did not know why it was. They did not understand the nature of the Yellow Spring. Even if some innate gods went underground to observe the netherworld out of curiosity, they could not understand the mysterious mystery contained in the netherworld. Naturally, it was impossible for them to know what kind of changes had occurred in the netherworld through the appearance of this obscure light. Therefore, after discussing for countless times, they could only stop their thoughts and quietly wait for the development of the matter and the results to be revealed. Fortunately, they were used to Luo Fan's unfathomable power. Although they could not really know what kind of changes had happened to the Yellow Spring, they did not feel too uncomfortable. The network formed by the obscure light only appeared in the void for a few breaths, and then gradually disappeared. After the light faded, countless tiny vortexes seemed to have appeared in every inch of the untainted land and in every thread of the tributary of the Yellow Spring. It looked like the vortexes in the sky observation mirror, and it was even more similar to the vortexes in the space-time illusion that spanned across the void. This formation had transformed into an almost limitless network of threads. It had actually become an extension of the trial world. Disperse. Seeing this, Luo Fan knew that everything was done, so he raised his hand and waved gently. In front of him, the heaven-observing mirror, which was several meters in diameter, slightly trembled and rapidly shrank. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunk to the size of a speck of dust, hidden in a small singularity in the core, and disappeared in front of Luo Fan. The silk thread formed by the array also entered the singularity. It looked as if it had been created out of thin air, as if it had been created from an infinitely distant place in the void. Then, it extended into the depths of the void for an unknown amount of time, before using the singularity as a bridge and extending into the Yellow Springs. Seeing this change, Luo Fan instantly understood that the trial world was no longer limited to the space-time illusion. The entire Yellow Spring had become a part of the trial world. With a thought, he connected his mind to the Yellow Spring network. Then, countless pieces of information flashed through his mind. Countless secrets about the structure of the Yellow Spring network, the essence of the technique that connected the Yellow Spring network, and the origin of the transmission of thoughts were all contained within the countless pieces of information. Under his control, the countless pieces of information reorganized crazily and changed constantly. In a short while, it formed a seemingly simple mantra with only 100 words, but in fact, it contained endless secrets of heaven and earth. After the mantra appeared, Luo Fan condensed it and turned it into a spiritual light. With a casual point of his finger, the spiritual light shot out from his hand and rushed forward. Finally, under the mysterious and wonderful invisible force, it gradually merged into the Yellow Spring network and disappeared in front of Luo Fan. As the spiritual light merged into the Yellow Spring network, the innate gods, who were scattered all over the untainted world and were chanting the mantra of the Yellow Spring network, received the spiritual light almost at the same time. They knew the existence of the mantra of the Yellow Spring network. Everyone's heart trembled slightly, and they knew that the result of the change had finally come. As they carefully comprehended the mantra of the Yellow Spring network, an inexplicable expectation arose in their minds. They were looking forward to what this mantra of the Yellow Spring network would bring to them. After the spiritual light merged into the Yellow Spring network, from now on, as long as they could come into contact with the Yellow Spring network, they would naturally be able to obtain the mantra of the Yellow Spring network. Although this mantra of the Yellow Spring network was very short, it was incomparably exquisite. No matter what level of cultivation a living being was at, or even if they had no intelligence, as long as they recited this mantra, they would be able to separate a bit of their consciousness and send it into the trial world that had fused with the Yellow Springs network. Just like the innate gods in the time and space illusion, he condensed his psyche into an incarnation and entered the 12,960,000 square feet of illusory heaven and earth, enduring the tempering of the illusory heaven and earth and comprehending the 12,960,000 heart demons. To perfect their Taoist heart. After doing all this, Luo Fan was about to explain the mantra of the Yellow Spring network. Suddenly, lightning flashed in his mind, and a thought appeared in his mind. This Yellow Spring network is like the telephone network in my previous life. If I adjust it slightly, can I form a different kind of internet? If I combine the characteristics of the virtual world with it, can I create another virtual world in science fiction? The second world? As this thought flashed through his mind, Luo Fan's eyes could not help but light up. After coming to the primordial world for so many years, Luo Fan had lived a good life. He had even achieved the Tai dispersal and possessed power that he had never dreamed of in the past. However, this was not the place where he was born and raised. There were many things in the primordial world that he found inconvenient. Among them, the biggest inconvenience was that the primordial world was too big. Although there were countless Khanate gods in the primordial world, even after working hard for so many years and with the help of the god of Bujo Mountain and the others, he had only gathered nearly 1,000,000 Khanate gods. Moreover, because the primordial world was so huge, it made it very difficult for these Khanate gods to communicate with each other. This hindered the development of these Khanate gods. At this moment, this idea that suddenly emerged in his mind was extremely difficult to realize because of the existence of the Yellow Spring Network. However, as long as this idea could finally become a reality, the Khanate gods in the primordial world would be able to enter this virtual world at any time and place and communicate face-to-face with each other regardless of the distance. If that's the case, the rhythm of survival in the primordial world will probably be greatly accelerated. If I integrate the Tao of space-time into it, no matter where the living beings are, they will probably be able to use this virtual world to obtain a longer cultivation time. Luo Fan thought to himself. Just by thinking about it, he knew how great the change in the entire primordial world would be if his thoughts were realized. In an instant, Luo Fan had an indescribable feeling. If he did this, the primordial world would be completely different from the primordial world that he knew in his previous life. What Tao ancestor Hongjun, what 3 pure ones and 6 royals, what great magi demon war, what dragon and phoenix battle, what god confirmant, what journey to the west. They would probably never appear again. Suddenly, an inexplicable smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. I'm afraid that all the methods that I've prepared for the great tribulation of heaven and earth over the years are not as good as this idea of mine. This thought suddenly flashed in Luo Fan's mind. With a slight thought, Luo Fan's sun and moon true eyes and space-time true ear once again displayed their power. Countless images and sounds flashed in his mind. These images and sounds contained all kinds of changes and events that would happen in the future of the primordial world. Although the great tribulation of heaven and earth was still very blurry and its true appearance could not be seen clearly, he could still see some scenes and hear some sounds. In fact, he could even see the various scenes and changes after the great tribulation. Looking at these scenes clearly, Luo Fan let out a long sigh. A feeling of joy and satisfaction mixed with a sense of loss flowed through his mind in an instant. That was because the appearance of these images made him instantly understand that the threat of the great tribulation of heaven and earth had been weakened by more than 80%. In other words, just as he was about to put his thoughts into reality, the great tribulation of heaven and earth had almost been eliminated by him. This outcome was the goal that Luo Fan had worked hard to achieve for tens of thousands of years. It proved that the primordial world had been protected. From his point of view, he should naturally be happy and satisfied. However, what Luo Fan had been working tirelessly for tens of thousands of years was to deal with the great tribulation of heaven and earth of the primordial world. At this moment, he suddenly realized that the great tribulation of heaven and earth that he had been working hard to deal with had suddenly disappeared. He naturally felt that all his previous efforts had been in vain, and he had no goal to work hard for. Naturally, he felt a little lost. However, this sense of loss only appeared for a moment. After all, Luo Fan's Taoist heart had reached the 8th realm of Taoist heart, which was close to the great perfection. He instantly saw through the essence of the truth. The sense of loss naturally disappeared as he saw through the essence, and his mind returned to calmness. This matter is quite important, but it's not easy to make a decision. I still need to plan carefully. Such thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind, but he did not continue to stay there, nor did he immediately start putting the decision he had made before into reality. With a thought, he took a step forward, and his figure disappeared from the Yellow Spring. When he reappeared, he was already in the search cave at the top of Bujo Mountain. As for what kind of existence the trial world was, and what use the incantation with more than 100 words had, he believed that the innate gods would definitely be able to figure it out themselves. Even if they could not figure it out, they could ask and discuss with each other through the Yellow Spring Network and finally come to a conclusion. After arriving at the search cave, Luo Fan didn't stop. With a thought, the limitless Void Palace appeared and floated in the void. With a thought, he directly stepped into the palace and entered the minor dimension and the dimensional realm. Then, he entered the strange temple outside of the dimensional realm and the minor dimension. After he entered, the limitless Void Palace rippled a few times, then disappeared into the void and could no longer be seen. The Void Wuji Palace was an extremely mysterious magic treasure. Its concealment ability was more powerful than any other magic treasure that Luo Fan had refined. Disappearing into the void was naturally an extremely simple thing to do. After arriving at the strange palace, Luo Fan sat cross-legged on the platform in the depths of the palace. He closed his eyes and began to think carefully about how to build a virtual world based on the Yellow Spring Network to communicate with all the living beings in the untainted land. From a practical point of view, this matter was very simple. For Luo Fan, he only needed to spend a few years. That would be enough. However, apart from that, there were all sorts of considerations and ideas that were related to all sorts of aspects, and they were incomparably complicated. Moreover, because it concerned the future of the entire untainted land, he needed to consider everything. There were countless things that needed to be considered, but he needed to be extremely careful and cautious. He also needed to verify it countless times before he could turn it into reality. Under such circumstances, he naturally had to choose this location. After all, they are creatures naturally born in the Yellow Springs, and with the Yellow Springs as the foundation, if I were to establish this virtual world, it would be fine at this time, but as more creatures enter the virtual world in the future, I'm afraid it will affect the Yellow Springs. If these invisible talisman ghosts can't change along with the Yellow Springs, I'm afraid they will all die because of this. That wouldn't be good. The first question Luo Fan thought about was this. Along with this question, more complicated and messy problems that seemed extremely small but were of great importance emerged one by one. They instantly filled his mind and mind, making him feel that it was very troublesome to set up such a virtual world. Looking at these questions, even Luo Fan, who had a firm Taoist heart, could not help but feel like he had been cheated and complained. In science fiction, there are always virtual worlds that appear at every turn, and some of them only require a computer. How did it become so complicated for me? Looking at these questions, even Luo Fan, who had a firm Taoist heart, could not help but feel cheated and complained. When Luo Fan strode away, the innate gods who had received Luo Fan's divine light began to move. Some of the innate gods with higher cultivation realms and better aptitudes were fine. They carefully comprehended the mantra composed of more than 100 words, constantly dismantled it, and carefully comprehended the mystery in it. They wanted to find out its function and then decide what to do. However, most of the innate gods did not care. They silently recited the mantra of more than 100 words, so that their minds and minds were in a mysterious state. Some of their minds were even connected with some inexplicable existence in the unseen world. They transformed into another innate god and entered the virtual world, beginning their journey of trial in the world. Those innate gods who comprehended and dismantled this part of the mantra would naturally not be able to truly understand the mysteries within. However, this mantra could compress such a huge amount of mysteries of heaven and earth into these hundreds of words, so its structure was naturally very mysterious and contained all kinds of mysteries. Chapter 425. 1,000 years of progress and a primordial spirit. It took Luo Fan 3 years to integrate the trial world into the Nether Network. More than 1,000 years had passed in the space-time illusion. In the past 1,000 years, although the innate deity in the space-time illusion did not always put all his attention on the trial world, he still spent most of his time trying to break through the trial world. The innate gods were born naturally, and they were born with excellent aptitudes. Their understanding of Tao, divine powers, and cultivation methods was naturally much higher than that of ordinary living beings. Under such circumstances, spending 1,000 years to explore a trial world, no matter how difficult the setting of the trial world was, or how many barriers needed to be broken through, was not an unsolvable problem for any innate gods. After more than 1,000 years, almost every innate god had made great progress. Even the worst one could break through an illusory world, kill an inner demon, and step into the first realm of Tao Heart. As for the innate gods who had a higher cultivation level, they could break through more than 100 illusory worlds and step into the fourth realm of Tao Heart when they entered the trial world for the first time. Many of them directly increased the illusory worlds they could break through to more than 1,000. Although they didn't break through 1,296 and achieve the fourth realm of Tao Heart, they reached the peak of the third realm of Tao Heart. No matter how fast a cultivation method was claimed to be or how fast it was claimed to be, when it reached a certain limit, was about to complete a certain stage of cultivation, and was about to make a great leap, it would definitely fall into a certain bottleneck, big or small. Even the 9 realms of Tao Heart that seemed to be organized by the innate gods themselves according to the trial world was the same. The first realm of the Tao Heart to the third realm was the cultivation that itinerant immortals had to complete. If one was unable to break through these 3 realms in the Tao Heart, then even if one's cultivation reached the peak of the itinerant immortal realm and even accumulated enough energy to reach the golden immortal realm, it would be impossible for one to break through to the itinerant immortal realm. So long as one was able to cultivate the Tao Heart to the fourth realm, in other words, one would be able to break through 1,296 cubic meters in the illusory world within the heavens and earth of the trial. Then the bottleneck between the heavenly immortal realm and true immortal realm would loosen up, and if one was able to charge through a formidable force, then one would be able to easily charge through the calmness of the heavenly immortal realm and arrive directly at the true immortal realm. If a cultivator could cultivate to the 5th level, it would be as if the bottleneck did not exist at all. It would allow a cultivator to easily break through the rogue immortal stage and become a true immortal before reaching the peak of the rogue immortal stage. Regardless of cultivation technique, the further one progressed, the more difficult it would be to cultivate. The 9 great realms of cultivation in the Tao Heart would naturally become more difficult the further one progressed. In order to cultivate the Tao Heart realm, one only had to see through an illusory world. Even cultivators who had yet to attain Tao would be able to complete this stage of cultivation after a certain amount of time. On the other hand, if one wanted to cultivate the 2 realms of the Tao Heart, then one needed to see through 9 realms of the illusory heaven and earth. To any cultivator that hadn't attained the Tao, seeing through an illusory world was already their limit. But to cultivators that had attained the heavenly immortal realm, they only had to spend a certain amount of time to completely stabilize their cultivation and eliminate the great hidden dangers in their hearts, and they were usually able to cultivate it with ease. On the other hand, to cultivate the 3rd realm required one to see through the 99 illusory worlds, and the difficulty of this was countless times greater than the 2nd realm. It required one to possess extraordinary understanding of one's heart and control of one's thoughts that exceeded one's imagination in order to be able to accomplish it. On the other hand, if one wanted to break through after seeing through the 99 illusory worlds, then one would encounter an enormous bottleneck. This bottleneck was something that a cultivator's cultivation of their heart and Tao Heart had already attained a state of seeing through 100 cubic meters of space before they started cultivating. Then they would naturally be able to easily see through the 99 illusory worlds. But if the cultivation of the Tao Heart completely relied on seeing through numerous worlds to grow, then it would be like a natural chasm that required endless effort and time to be able to be seen through. Only then would one be able to attain the 3rd realm of the Tao Heart. On the other hand, the bottleneck between the 3 realms of the Tao Heart and the 4 realms of the Tao Heart was the first major bottleneck in the cultivation of the 9 realms of the Tao Heart, because it was related to whether a cultivator's cultivation would be able to break through the limits of the heavenly immortal realm and attain the true immortal realm. This was related to the transformation of the essence of one's life. And the difficulty of breaking through is so great that it was countless times more difficult than breaking through from the second realm of the Tao heart to the third realm of the Tao heart. The difficulty of breaking through is obvious. After that, the difficulty of breaking through from the fourth realm to the fifth realm, sixth realm, seventh realm, and eighth realm would increase on this foundation. The higher the bottleneck, the difficulty of breaking through would be a myriad of times more difficult than the bottleneck of the previous realm. If one attained the peak of the eighth realm of the Tao heart, then the firmness of the bottleneck one encountered would have already attained an unbelievable state. Breaking through this bottleneck wasn't something that could be accomplished by cultivating diligently. It required extraordinary fortuitous encounter, and it even required shocking luck. If one didn't possess fortuitous encounter and luck, or even if one's fortuitous encounter and luck weren't heaven-defying enough, then one would absolutely be unable to break through even if one cultivated for a myriad of years. Just like Luo Fan at this moment. Even though he'd already relied on his cultivation at the peak of the primordial dispersal to easily attain the eighth realm of the Tao heart, and he was able to casually see through the 12,960,000 worlds and annihilate 12,960,000 types of mental demons. He was unable to break through the bottleneck between the 8 realms and step foot into the 9 realms to allow his Tao heart to truly attain perfection and become pure and untainted. This obviously showed exactly how difficult it was to cultivate the 9 realms of the Tao heart. During these past 1,000 plus years of time, the innate God that had truly attained the 4 realms of the Tao heart and greatly weakened the bottleneck between the heavenly immortal realm and true immortal realm was actually still that innate God that had seen through over 100 illusory worlds when he'd placed his consciousness into the heavens and earth for the first time over 1,000 years ago. Even though many other innate gods improved extremely swiftly, and their understanding of their own Tao hearts and their own souls grew at an unimaginable speed. But in the end, the limit of their growth was only 98 cubes, and they were unable to truly break through the bottleneck of the 99 illusory worlds. However, even so, the more illusory worlds they saw through, the more perfect the innate God's mastery of his own cultivation was. Breaking through the illusory worlds to 98 cubes was already the peak of the 3 realms of the Tao heart. Innate gods with such a realm of the Tao heart would definitely be able to raise their cultivation to the peak of the heavenly immortal realm in a certain amount of time. Moreover, their control of their own cultivation, their own physical body, their own soul, their own divine powers, their own magic arts, and their own celestial devices could all reach an incomparably perfect state. During these past 1,000 plus years, the innate gods that had seen through the illusory worlds to 98 cubes had already accumulated to the point of more than 60,000. However, there were only 9 innate gods that could see through the illusory worlds to more than 100 cubes and attain the 4 realms of the Tao heart. The strongest one had seen through the illusory worlds to 1,295 cubes and was only one step away from breaking through the 3 realms of the Tao heart and attaining the 4 realms of the Tao heart. His cultivation had also reached the point where he was only one step away from breaking through the heavenly immortal realm and attaining the true immortal realm. Although the cultivation of these 9 innate gods was the same as most of the other 60,000 innate gods, they were all at the peak of the heavenly immortal realm. However, because they had seen through more illusory worlds, their control over their physical body, divine soul, energy, divine power, magic arts, celestial devices, and so on surpassed them by a few times. Therefore, even the weakest of these 9 innate gods could easily fight against 100 innate gods of the same realm as him. The magical effect of cultivating the Tao heart could be imagined at this point. It was also because of the existence of such a gap that those innate gods had a clearer understanding of the 9 realms of the Tao heart, and it also made them more proactive in cultivating in the trial of the Tao heart. The innate God that had seen through 1,295 cubes of illusory worlds was called G2, and it was a mysterious life form called Dragon Thorn that had attained Tao. The body that it had transformed into was that of a short old man. This old man was now in the depths of a dark and damp swamp in the space-time illusion, hidden more than 100 miles below the swamp. G2 had stayed here for tens of thousands of years. Since he saw the scene of Luo Fan gathering many innate gods to assign tasks, he really realized the gap between him and the real experts. His fighting spirit rose in his heart, and he moved his cave residence to the depths of the dark and damp swamp. The environment here was naturally quite bad. The air was turbid, the ground was damp, and the miasma soared into the sky. Even for an innate god, it was not a good feeling to live here. However, because G2 was a dragon thorn that had attained Tao, he cultivated a kind of cultivation method that enhanced himself with the help of the miasma, and this place was suitable for his cultivation. Therefore, after knowing how weak he was, he resisted the harsh environment that he was unwilling to experience in the past, and opened up a cave residence in this location, hoping to break through the individual immortal realm and become a genuine immortal as soon as possible. Perhaps it was because of his determination, or perhaps it was because of the environment. G2 had made great progress over the years. Not only did he improve his cultivation realm from the individual immortal realm to the peak of the individual immortal realm, he had also improved his Taoist heart to a level that was far beyond that of other innate gods. More than 1,000 years ago, Luo Fan had set up this trial world in the sky of the space-time illusion, giving him a wonderful condition to improve his Tao heart. G2's aptitude was not very good, but after he started cultivating, he had always paid attention to the cultivation of his Tao heart. Therefore, when he entered the trial world for the first time, G2 was acutely aware of the benefits of the trial world for him. When he participated in the trial for the first time, he used all his energy and effort to directly push the number of virtual worlds to 120 cubes. This amount of virtual worlds was a sign that his Tao heart had already attained the third realm of Tao heart. However, it didn't mean that breaking through the 120 cubes of virtual worlds wasn't beneficial to him at all. In fact, the benefits were so great that even if G2 knew that breaking through the virtual world was extremely beneficial to him, he still couldn't help but be extremely shocked. It was precisely because of these benefits that he started to contact the other innate gods and sort out the 9 realms of Tao heart. The benefit of breaking through the world was that it straightened out and integrated his incomplete Tao heart cultivation. It allowed his Tao heart that was originally in a mess. And even if he had attained the realm of Tao heart, he was still unable to fully bring forth the might of his Tao heart. After being integrated through the method of breaking through the virtual world, G2 instantly felt that the might he could bring forth was over 10 times stronger than before. It was precisely because of him that the other hundreds of thousands of innate gods finally realized the extraordinary effects of the trial world, and they attached even more importance to it. If it wasn't for that, how could he have completely determined the grading system of the 9 realms of Tao heart that Luo Fan hadn't come to a conclusion in just a few short days? At this moment, there was a faintly discernible, illusory black mist rolling around the short old man's body. This black mist was unpredictable, and in every instant, there were tens of thousands of forms being born and destroyed. These forms were complicated and unfathomable. They seemed to contain everything in the world, billions of living beings, and countless magical tools. There were even the shadows of countless divine abilities and techniques that could be found within them. G2 was an innate god that Fentian had invited. Originally, from the moment he was born until he met Fentian, the cultivation method that he had cultivated was not systematic. In other words, it was very incomplete. He had only cultivated according to some cultivation methods that he had created based on Pangu's primordial spirit and his rather simple and pure will. But even so, this thorn was still able to raise his cultivation level to the point where he was only one step away from achieving the Tao. Just as the thorns were stuck in a bottleneck and could not find a way out from the extremely incomplete cultivation technique, Fentian, who had invited the innate gods along the way, arrived at the location of the thorns and saw them. Fentian, who discovered the thorn, was extremely shocked and overjoyed at the same time. It was because G2's extremely incomplete and unsystematic cultivation technique actually achieved the same result as his primordial spirit, Great Tao, through different means. Although it could not be compared to the completeness of the primordial spirit, Great Tao, nor could it be compared to the profundity of the primordial spirit, Great Tao, it could be seen that the two were connected. Because of this coincidence, after Fentian communicated with the thorn, he used his own primordial spirit, Great Tao, to change and organize the thorn's cultivation method. In the end, he allowed the thorn's cultivation method to be included in the scope of the primordial spirit, Great Tao, allowing the thorn to become the second innate god to cultivate the primordial spirit, Great Tao, in this world. On the spot, he triggered the thorn's heavenly tribulation, allowing it to pass through the heavenly tribulation and finally cultivate the primordial spirit, becoming an itinerant immortal. However, even though the cultivation method that the thorn had originally cultivated was similar to the primordial spirit, Great Tao, and could even be said to belong to the same system as the primordial spirit, Great Tao, it was not the primordial spirit, Great Tao after all. Using that incomplete cultivation method to cultivate to the peak of the crossing disaster realm, G2's foundation was already extremely solid. Even if he were to cultivate the primordial spirit, Great Tao, later on and become an itinerant immortal, due to the difference in his foundation, it caused him to have a huge flaw in the cultivation of the primordial spirit, Great Tao. Even when he first came to the entrance of the space-time illusion and met Luo Fan's ****, under the guidance of the ****, he tried his best to make up for the flaw in his foundation. However, he could not completely eliminate it. He could only use a long period of time to accumulate and use a long period of cultivation to make up for the flaw. This was also the reason why G2 had not broken through to the itinerant immortal realm until the last time when Luo Fan chose the innate deity. He had not even reached the peak of the itinerant immortal realm. It was precisely because of his past that G2 was greatly irritated when Luo Fan chose the innate deity to guard the untainted land and did not choose him. Fortunately, Luo Fan's guidance was quite effective. During these years, he finally made up for the flaws left by the different cultivation methods in the past. Because of this long period of cultivation and making up, his Taoist heart had long reached the level of the three realms of Taoist heart. At this time, G2 was sitting cross-legged in his cave residence. Although this cave residence was called a cave residence, in fact, it was just an invisible array. It was 1,000 feet in radius, and the furniture inside was completely condensed by the power of the array. The furnishings were very simple, but at the same time, it exuded a kind of free and easy aura, which made people know at first glance that it was an immortal cave residence. The indistinct, illusory, and unpredictable mist around G2's body was the phenomenon caused by the manifestation of G2's primordial spirit. G2's Taoist heart had reached the peak of the three realms, so his understanding of his body, primordial spirit, and strength had reached an unimaginable peak. With his extraordinary understanding of himself, he only needed to expend a certain amount of energy to easily create all kinds of divine abilities and incantations that could unleash the strongest power of his primordial spirit and his energy. He could even create all kinds of formations. Although these divine abilities, incantations, and formations could only unleash their strongest effect when he was still at the peak of the realm of an itinerant immortal. And once he broke through the realm of an itinerant immortal and became a true immortal, the effects of these divine abilities, incantations, and formations would be greatly reduced. But it was still an extremely rare ability that had an astonishing effect on the improvement of his strength. At this time, G2 was trying to break through the 1,296th area of the heaven and earth. He hoped to be able to achieve the four realms of Taoist heart in the end. With his strong accumulation, so long as he was able to attain the four realms of Taoist heart, the bottleneck between the itinerant immortal realm and the perfected immortal realm would be broken through by him in one go. At that time, his primordial spirit, body, and true essence would undergo some kind of extremely profound change, and he would instantly attain the perfected immortal realm. Chapter 426. A shocking change in the primordial spirit of 1,000,000 primordial spirits at this moment. All of G2's attention was focused on the trial world. His physical body and primordial spirit were both intact. In fact, he was no different from an empty shell. Although this kind of empty shell didn't affect G2 much. As long as his body was attacked or sensed danger, his attention would naturally return to his physical body and attach to his primordial spirit. However, this method of completely opening up his body was quite dangerous after all. In this world, almost any innate god had the ability to kill G2 before his attention was drawn back to them. From this, one could see how determined G2 was to break through the 1,296 square meter of illusory space. G2 was different from other innate gods. Every time other innate gods broke through a certain world, they would need to spend a certain amount of time to cultivate and improve their cultivation realm so that they could adapt to their improved Tao heart. In addition, every time they came out of the trial world, they would be engulfed by their inner demons and their mental strength would be damaged. They would need to spend a certain amount of time to repair their mental strength. Because of these two burdens, ordinary innate gods could only devote less than 1% of their time to the trial grounds in the past 1,000 years. Although G2's mind was damaged every time he left the trial heaven and earth, he had stayed in the itinerant immortal realm for so many years after all, so the recovery speed of his mind was dozens of times faster than that of ordinary innate gods. Moreover, because his cultivation realm had already risen to the peak of the disbanded immortal realm, it was already compatible with his Tao heart realm. Thus, he didn't need to spend time to improve his cultivation realm after seeing through the new illusory world. Thus, in these 1,000 years, the time he truly invested in the trial world was tens of times more than the other innate gods. It was because of this difference that G2 was able to improve the virtual world. He could break through to this level in the past 1,000 years. Even in the eyes of Luo Fan, this speed of improvement was absolutely shocking. Time passed slowly. Around G2's body, the black mist that seemed to be both real and illusory suddenly sped up and then slowed down. The various strange existences that had been condensed within them were tumbling about incessantly, displaying just how restless his heart was at this moment. G2's body did not move, and his expression did not change at all. He seemed extremely calm, and even his soul only sat cross-legged in his sea of consciousness. There were not many changes to it. However, those who truly knew what G2 was doing would instantly understand what kind of dangerous situation it was in as soon as they saw him. The 1,296 virtual worlds were no different from the other 12,959,999 worlds. Even the first virtual world that some innate gods saw through was this world. However, he was the bottleneck of G2, the strongest innate god in the entire space-time illusion. To him, this illusory world was even more dangerous than the 1,295 illusory worlds he had seen in the past 1,000 years combined. It was even more complicated. If that was all, then although it would be slightly troublesome for the thorns, it was definitely not dangerous. After all, even if he failed, his mind would only be damaged. As long as he spent a certain amount of time to nourish his mind could be restored. However, at this moment, G2 had already cut off all means of retreat. The moment he split that bit of consciousness, he completely focused all of his attention, including all of his spirit, on it. If he were to be devoured by the heart demon and sink into that illusory world, what awaited him would not just be a little bit of damage to his mind. That kind of damage would probably instantly affect his entire mind. Even if he could not truly sink into the heart demon, he would need to spend 1,000 times more time in order to recover his mind. It might even leave a permanent shadow in his heart, making the difficulty of breaking through the 1,296 virtual worlds soar by more than 10 million times. It might even reach the point where he could never break through. This price was unbearable for G2, who had become the first innate god in the space-time illusion, and even for those innate gods at the bottom. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. The flow of time in the trial world was completely dependent on the innate god who had penetrated his mind into it. If the innate god was anxious, perhaps a moment could be equivalent to tens of millions of years. If the innate god was extremely patient, perhaps tens of millions of years could only be equivalent to a few years. The subtlety was so mysterious that it could not be described in words. Although G2 was anxious to break through the illusory world, even to the point of cutting off all means of retreat and sinking into it, he also knew that he could not be impatient to break through the illusory world. Especially when he was cutting off all means of retreat, he could not have any impatient thoughts. Therefore, for him, 100 years was only more than 1,000,000 years. For the untainted world evolved from the 1,296 virtual worlds, this period of time was only about 10 yuan Hui, which was neither long nor short. The untainted world evolved from the illusory world had nothing in common with the real, untainted world. The inner demon corresponding to this illusory world was control. 12,960,000 inner demons included all the thoughts that a living being might have. Whether it was the 7 emotions or the 6 desires, whether it was the desire of the soul or the thought of daily thinking, as long as it was a thought that could appear in a living being's heart, it could develop into an inner demon. Of course, control could also become a kind of inner demon. Moreover, it was a very common kind of inner demon combined with greed. The untainted world evolved from the untainted world that G2 knew, and it had experienced countless changes. In the great tribulation of heaven and earth that Luo Fan had told everyone, it had collapsed into countless fragments. In the end, through various opportunities and changes, G2's cultivation was promoted to the realm of origin stage Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal. He controlled the rest of the untainted world, everything in the world, and the operation of all the fragments of the untainted world. When he spoke, the laws of heaven and earth would respond, and when he raised his hand, the sun, the moon, and the stars would change their operation rules. These evolved scenes were extremely real. The entire process of development was traceable. No matter how the spikes tried to deduce or imagine, they were unable to find any irregularities or falsehoods in the process. The feeling of controlling everything in the world, controlling all the fragments of the untainted world, and controlling the laws of heaven and earth was extremely clear. There were even countless cultivation methods of divine powers in his memory. It was precisely because of all these that G2 could not see through this illusory world until now. He was immersed in the wonderful feeling of controlling everything and enjoyed the joy and satisfaction that this illusory world brought him. If G2's Tao heart was not firm, and he vaguely knew that he still had some things to do in the depths of his heart, and he also knew that he seemed to have some kind of mission in this world, he was afraid that he would have already sunk into it, been devoured by the inner demon, and been expelled from the trial world. However, at this time, G2 was also close to his limit. The broken untainted world was divided into countless fragments, among which 4 of the largest fragments were needed by G2 again, forming a small, untainted world. G2's Taoist field was above the 9 heavens of this small, untainted world in the boundless chaos. On this day, G2 preached the method of splitting heaven and earth to the 36 disciples below him. When he was talking, he gently waved his hand, and as the earth, water, fire, and wind surged, billions of heavens and earth were born under his hands. In these heavens and earth, countless living beings were born in an instant. The disciples below him were at least Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals, and they were only a step behind him, a perfected Golden Immortal of the origin stage. However, they were extremely respectful to him, and the admiration in their eyes could even make someone with a heart of stone leave something for them. At this time, G2 was sitting cross-legged on the high platform, his face indifferent, and his eyes were calm, as if there were no fluctuations of emotion. His heart was like dead water, and there seemed to be endless storms hidden in his eyes. The Tao of splitting heaven and earth is the supreme Tao. If you can one day open a heavens and earth, you will be able to break through the origin stage and become an immortal, perfected, golden immortal of the origin stage. Jitu said indifferently on the high platform. He had destroyed billions of heavens and earth with a wave of his hand. At the same time, he had destroyed countless living beings in each heavens and earth. At this time, a disciple below the platform said respectfully, "Master is the only innate deity left in this world, and he can open a heavens and earth at will with the innate chi. We are all post-celestial beings, and we can't reach this step without cultivating for billions of years." Yes, on that day, the great tribulation of heaven and earth not only shattered the untainted land into countless pieces, but also killed millions of innate deities. If Master didn't break through two realms and become a primordial unity, disbanded immortal on the spot, I'm afraid the whole untainted land would have been destroyed by the extraterrestrial demons. Unfortunately, even so, the innate chi of the untainted land has been exhausted, and the path of the living beings born after the Great Tribulation has been cut off, another disciple echoed. Jitu was in control of everything, but he was quite kind to the disciples. Because of this, these disciples did not tremble with fear and did not dare to speak. Hearing their words, Jitu felt a little sad, a little happy, and a lot of nostalgia. In an instant, the experience of millions of years flowed slowly in his mind. Millions of years have passed unknowingly. I was born in a swamp and comprehended the great way of primordial spirit. Hundreds of thousands of years later, I met fellow Taoist Funtian and perfected the great way of primordial spirit. Then, I learned that the great tribulation of heaven and earth was coming, so I cultivated hard in an illusory realm for tens of thousands of years, hoping that I could do my part when the great tribulation came one day. I didn't expect that the great tribulation of heaven and earth would be so amazing that it broke the heavens and earth and destroyed everything. None of my countless preparations could be used. If I didn't have a great opportunity, I'm afraid I would have died in that great tribulation. Jitu recalled calmly. The endless light and shadow flowed slowly in his mind. His whole mind was immersed in it, as if he was there, feeling the traces left in his heart by the past years. It's just that, although the feeling of being in control of everything is wonderful, why do I feel like something is missing? As Jitu pondered, he gradually delved deeper into his subconscious and gradually sensed the trace of clarity and awkwardness left in the depths of his subconscious. Control, control, Jitu murmured. It doesn't seem to be like this. I seem to have forgotten something. Jitu thought to himself. The yuan qi around his body began to circulate slightly, and endless phenomena gradually began to appear in a radius of millions of miles around his body. Lightning flashes, thunder rolls, storms, mysterious lights, green lotuses, ghostly wails, and wolf howls, everything that could appear in the world. It was impossible for them to appear. All of them appeared. The 36 perfected, golden, immortal disciples in front of him looked at each other and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. With their ability, they were quite able to withstand this kind of phenomenon that didn't specialize in combat. Therefore, they still sat cross-legged on the praying mat and didn't move. Even so, this was, after all, a phenomenon caused by a perfected golden immortal. Just the aura alone was enough to make them feel inexplicably horrified and shocked. However, they didn't dare to move. Jitu had already fallen into his own world. He gradually furrowed his brows. The experience of these millions of years began to be broken down bit by bit in his mind. Every image and every sound reappeared as if they were seen and heard by him again. He didn't know how many times he had done this process. Every time he felt that something was wrong, he would do it again. But this time, the feeling that something was wrong was particularly strong. It was as if he had finally grasped the key point and grasped some inspiration. He had a strong hunch that he would definitely be able to find something wrong this time. Control. That's right, it's control. This kind of thought was actually hidden in the depths of my spiritual consciousness since I was born. This isn't my own thought. After thoroughly checking every thought in his mind hundreds of thousands of times, G2 suddenly shook and finally found the source of the problem. As he found the source of the problem, it was as if the barrier in front of him had been lifted, and he instantly felt that everything in front of him had become unprecedentedly clear. What he had done in the past millions of years didn't need to be controlled, and directly flashed through his mind. Finally, a figure emerged from his memory. It was a young man with a simple face and a dark green robe. The young man was suspended in the void, and there was no aura exuding from his body. He looked like an ordinary person without any power. Even his eyes were very ordinary. There was a dull and lifeless look in the depths of his eyes, as if he was just a puppet. This figure was Luo Fan. However, it seemed that he had lost his true essence. He was just a shell, and G2 had given him some external vitality that was incompatible with his body. Originally, this external injection of vitality didn't seem like much before the spines lifted the barrier covering their eyes. But now it made the spines feel so uncomfortable. It felt so fake. That vitality. Every single action of this figure was so awkward. It was as if his actions, every single action, his vitality, his gaze, and his demeanor were all far from being worthy of his physical body. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, the figure trembled slightly. Suddenly, a gold and silver light flashed through his eyes. In an instant, G2 suddenly felt as if he had been completely seen through. It was as if all of his secrets and thoughts in the depths of his heart were clearly seen by this person in front of him. Then, the figure's eyes returned to normal, and there was a subtle change in his expression. Even the posture of his entire body that was suspended there was slightly adjusted. It was this subtle change that instantly caused this person to undergo an earth-shattering change. There was still no aura coming from his body, and there were no changes to his body either. But as he stood there, G2 felt as if he was facing the supreme Tao. It was as if every move he made, every breath he took contained the truth of heaven and earth and the profundities of the universe. Even the slightest tremble of his skin seemed to be able to comprehend all kinds of magic arts and the truth of martial arts from it. This is Luo Fan. G2's face showed a look of sudden realization, and he opened his mouth and said. His tone was as if he was saying, "This is Pangu," and it contained an extremely strong sense of respect. When Luo Fan's figure appeared, endless memories emerged in the depths of his spiritual sense out of nowhere and instantly covered his memories of controlling the entire untainted world for millions of years. This allowed him to instantly understand where he was at this moment and why he was here. I've finally seen through this illusory world. Great enlightenment flashed through G2's eyes. His body gradually emitted an aura that was perfect and inclusive of all things, but not stagnant in all things. In an instant, G2 knew that he had seen through the 1296th illusory world, and that he had achieved the fourth realm of Tao Heart. At this moment, his mind shook slightly, and the entire illusory world suddenly collapsed and dissipated. G2's mind also left the illusory world and returned to his physical body. At the same time, a change that had never appeared in the untainted world, and a change that no innate deity had expected, appeared in G2's body. G2's primordial spirit suddenly changed. A simple and unadorned young man in a dark blue robe, with golden and silver luster in the depths of his eyes, replaced his original primordial spirit and appeared in his sea of consciousness. Chapter 427. Luo Fan. This change was not just a general change in shape, but from the smallest wrinkles on his skin to every inch of his body. It was a complete change to the appearance of Luo Fan. It looked as if Luo Fan had appeared in his sea of knowledge. It was impossible to tell that it was a soul that had changed shape. The strength of the primordial spirit also increased by more than 100 times with this change. It seemed to have formed some kind of subtle connection with the supreme Tao, as if it could do countless things that it could not do in the past, and display power that was tens of thousands of times stronger than before. The moment this change occurred, the faint black mist around G2's body shook slightly, and instantly disappeared without a trace. At the same time, Jitu's body also exuded a mysterious, indescribably wondrous aura. It seemed to resonate with the surrounding heaven and earth, as if it could control time and space in this area. At this moment, it was as if a thunderclap had exploded in Jitu's mind. In an instant, Jitu's mind became blank. After an unknown amount of time, more and more light and shadows appeared in this blank space, from slow to fast. These light and shadows appeared and disappeared very slowly at first, almost like a picture slowly passing by in front of an ordinary person. But as time passed, the speed at which they appeared became faster and faster. In the end, it was like a strong light was refined, making it impossible for any living being except Jitu to see what the light and shadow was showing. During this process, Jitu's eyes gradually became clear from the blankness of his soul, and then gradually became deep. In the end, when all the light and shadows abruptly disappeared, the eyes of the spikes were like two deep universes. They seemed to be able to reflect everything in the universe, yet they also seemed to be unable to leave any trace of light in their eyes. The light and shadows that flashed in Jitu's mind from slow to fast were all of Jitu's memories from his birth until this moment. This included everything he had seen and heard when he had just developed a trace of spiritual sense in the chaotic origin energy source. Every moment he had experienced in the 1,296 virtual worlds in the trial world, and all of the harvests he had obtained after countless years of tireless pursuit of the great Tao. In this extremely short period of time, Jitu felt as if he had experienced his life all over again. Gradually, he felt as if everything was under his control. As his eyes turned slightly, he seemed to see through the void and everything in the world. I never thought that fellow would visualize my form as your own primordial spirit. This is truly flattering. At this moment, a leisurely sigh sounded in Jitu's ears. When Jitu heard this voice, his expression did not change at all. He only stood up indifferently, bowed slightly, and said, "The form of the Tao sovereign contains the supreme great Tao. Jitu is untalented and has comprehended a little. I hope that the Tao sovereign will forgive me." In the past, Jitu had only called Luo Fan a fellow Taoist. But now, after he visualized his primordial spirit into Luo Fan's appearance, he could no longer call Luo Fan like before. He could only call him a Tao sovereign. He had visualized Luo Fan's figure as his own primordial spirit. This kind of action was using Luo Fan's image to communicate with the void, and it was also equivalent to using the results of Luo Fan's cultivation. To him, his relationship with Luo Fan had long since changed from a cultivation friend to a different kind of relationship. It was similar to the relationship between Luo Fan and Pangu. Although the great Tao of the Tao fruit that Luo Fan cultivated was a cultivation method that formed its own great Tao, its essence was detachment. However, as his cultivation progressed, his divine soul gradually approached Pangu's, from the original Buzhou mountain to Pangu's spine, and from Pangu's spine to Pangu's skeleton. It could be expected that what would change next would be the real body of Pangu. The whole process was also using the results of Pangu's cultivation to communicate with the void and open up the world of the sea of consciousness. In essence, it was similar to Jitu's method. The only difference was that the Pangu that Luo Fan borrowed from Pangu had already transformed into the vast and majestic primordial world. When Luo Fan could truly transcend Pangu, he would transcend the primordial world. In the primordial world, it could be considered as a righteous cultivation method, and it could even be said to be a cultivation method that was closest to the origin. Whether it was for Luo Fan or Pangu, it didn't affect them much. But Jitu was different. What he visualized was Luo Fan, a living innate god, an innate god who had reached the peak of the Tai scatter and was recognized by heaven and earth. He turned his primordial spirit into the form of Luo Fan, and with the help of Luo Fan's cultivation method, he communicated with the void, communicated with the sea of consciousness, and even used the results of his cultivation to communicate with heaven and earth and control Yuan Gang. In this way, his origin of life was connected with Luo Fan. That was to say, when he visualized his primordial spirit into the form of Luo Fan, he had a close connection with Luo Fan through some indescribable connection. From now on, when Luo Fan rose, he would have the chance to rise. If Luo Fan fell, he would also fall. If Luo Fan died, although he would not die with him, his primordial spirit would not be preserved and would probably collapse directly, turning him from a realm of true immortality to an ordinary innate god without any cultivation. The price he had to pay was not small. Because of this, even though Luo Fan was in the Void Wuji Palace thinking about the details of how to build a virtual world on the Yellow Spring Network, he also sensed the change in G2's day. At this time, G2 had already figured out the consequences of visualizing his primordial spirit into the form of Luo Fan, but he did not regret it at all. He just stood there calmly, with a calm expression on his face and an unfathomable look in his eyes. As he moved, everything around him seemed to no longer be able to keep any secrets. At this time, because G2 had seen through 1,296 virtual worlds, he had already achieved the 4th realm of Taoist Heart. At the instant he attained the 4 realms of the Tao Heart, the bottleneck between the itinerant immortal realm and the true immortal realm that he encountered in his cultivation realm was instantly reduced greatly. It allowed his extremely solid foundation to be broken with a single strike, and it brought him along to attain the true immortal realm in an instant. As for his primordial spirit, it was precisely at the moment when he reached the realm of true immortality that his primordial spirit was reconstructed to visualize Luo Fan's figure and appearance, which led to the current situation. Is it worth it? Luo Fan's leisurely sigh continued to enter G2's ears. At this time, Luo Fan was still in the inner hall of the Void Wuji Palace, talking to G2 as if they were face to face. This was not because Luo Fan had deliberately displayed his power, but because he had no other choice. After all, G2 had visualized his appearance as his primordial spirit, and it had just taken shape, so it was not completely stable. At this time, if he appeared in front of G2, it would naturally affect G2's primordial spirit. It might even assimilate G2's primordial spirit and eventually become a part of him. Its consciousness might even be annihilated without a trace. Fortunately, Luo Fan had the true eyes of the sun and moon and the true ear of space-time. Even if they were separated by several space-times, he could still see G2 and hear what G2 said. It was like talking face to face, and it would not affect his communication. As for G2, as long as Luo Fan's voice was heard, it would naturally cause his primordial spirit to tremble. Even if the voice was extremely soft, as long as G2 heard a trace of it, G2 would be able to hear every word clearly, and it might even be able to firmly remember it in the depths of his primordial spirit. It would not cause any barriers to communication due to the distance between them. Therefore, this method of communication was quite suitable for both Luo Fan and G2's day. Is it worth it? G2 smiled slightly and repeated the sentence. This sentence would be confusing to others, but to him, there was no confusion, doubt, or doubt. Instead, it revealed a sense of enlightenment, as if he had seen through all gains and losses. Why wouldn't it be worth it? Detachment and freedom are all relative. If the Tao Master had asked me this before I visualized the image of the Tao Master, I would definitely have some doubts. However, after visualizing the image of the Tao Sovereign, I have obtained a trace of the Tao Sovereign's wisdom. Thus, I have an unprecedentedly clear view of this problem. All the gains and losses in this matter are no longer a hindrance to me. G2 said with a smile. The expression on his face seemed as if he had attained enlightenment. There was no fanaticism or blindness in his eyes, nor was there much admiration for Luo Fan. Instead, it was a pure desire to seek Tao. Obviously, everything he had done before was not a wrong path. In his heart, it was still the path to immortality. I see. Since you are not shaken, I won't say more. A few years later, there will be a huge change. If you're interested, You can come and help." Seeing the pure desire in G2's eyes, Luo Fan knew that G2's mind was not shaken at all, nor did he change his goal. He was relieved and said, "Tao Master, please tell me." G2 bowed slightly. Luo Fan sighed, withdrew his perception of G2's location, and returned to the strange palace inside the Wuji Palace. Sitting cross-legged in the palace, he looked indifferent, but a trace of fear flashed in his eyes. After a long while, he sighed and said, "Borrowing the fruits of my cultivation to open up his sea of consciousness and communicate with the heavens and earth. Although he can obtain a trace of my wisdom and borrow the acknowledgement of the heavens and earth to cultivate and do things, he will be under my control for life. I can make him lose all his strength with just a thought. No matter how I look at it, this price is not worth it." Luo Fan was really puzzled, and he felt that G2's actions were really stupid. However, since the innate god had already done this and did not regret his decision, Luo Fan could not say anything. A cultivator's path of cultivation was chosen by himself. No one else, no matter what kind of living beings, no matter how many times stronger the cultivator was, could change it. It was not easy to change it. Since G2 had already made such a choice and didn't think that his approach was wrong, Luo Fan naturally wouldn't meddle in this matter. However, in this way, he could take on the most important responsibility in this virtual world, but I need to revise my plan. Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. After thinking about this, he slowly closed his eyes, and countless spiritual lights appeared and disappeared in his mind. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, more than a yuan hui had passed. On a certain day after a yuan hui, Luo Fan, who had been motionless for a long time, suddenly trembled and instantly woke up from the deepest level of thinking. He slowly opened his eyes, and golden and silver lights flashed in his eyes, as if there were countless lights and shadows flowing through the depths of his eyes. One could even faintly hear endless sounds coming out from these lights and shadows in some incredible way. This was the scene that Luo Fan could only see after sensing the various changes over the years with the help of his eyes and ears. Everything is normal. After seeing and listening to these sounds and shadows, such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. Next, he stood up and, without any preparation, took a step out of the Wuji Palace and came to the search cave. As he waved his hand, the Wuji Palace, which had been hidden in the void, slightly quaked, then transformed into a stream of earth-yellow light and rushed into the mud-pill palace between his eyebrows. It went straight into his sea of consciousness and turned into a huge palace that stood not far away from the feet of Pang the Skeleton. After taking back the Wuji Palace, Luo Fan took a step out and disappeared from the search cave. When he reappeared, he was already at the foot of Buzhou Mountain, where he had been not long ago. He had stayed in the Wuji Palace for more than a yuan hui, which was only a year in the eyes of the primitive world, so naturally, it was not long ago. The network of the netherworld originated from there and was formed because of the heavenly observation mirror. If he wanted to use the network of the netherworld to create a virtual world that could connect with the entire primordial world and allow all living beings in the primordial world to enter, he naturally had to take action at the source of the network of the netherworld. Luo Fan floated in the netherworld. The netherworld's spring water condensed from the endless turbid yin-chi around him seemed to have no substance. It flowed past his body, but it did not affect his body at all. Luo Fan stood there with an indifferent look on his face. However, a rare look of excitement appeared in his eyes. After all, what he was about to do had a great impact. It would completely change the history of the primordial world and make the primordial world follow the path he had set. In the end, it would become completely different from the legends he had heard in his previous life. In the face of such a major event that would change the history of the primordial world, even with Luo Fan's Tao heart that was close to perfection, he could not help but tremble slightly. This was reflected in his eyes. However, this excited light only appeared for an instant. After an instant, his eyes had completely returned to their original calmness and indifference. He had seen through everything. Luo Fan had already deduced and planned what he was going to do next for more than a period of time. He had already considered and verified tens of thousands of times for any changes that might happen, any accidents, the various mystical abilities and techniques that needed to be used, and the various rules that needed to be stipulated. At that moment, when he saw the netherworld in front of him, the scene that appeared in his mind was the countless steps of building the virtual world. He even saw the various scenes after the virtual world was formed. Although Luo Fan could use the true eyes of the sun and moon and the true ears of space-time to sense the past and future, and could even deduce the general behavior and fate of any living being whose cultivation level was lower than his in the future, however, that did not mean that he could use the power of sensing the future to avoid thinking and creating. In other words, he could not rely on the true eyes of the sun and moon and the true ears of space-time to see how the virtual world was built, what rules were used, what restrictions were used, how living beings entered and left, how balance was maintained, and other information related to the virtual world to build the virtual world. Luo Fan had not specifically determined what kind of rules would be used in this virtual world, what kind of magical powers and techniques would be used to construct it, how to maintain balance, and other conditions. Although he could also see the existence of this virtual world in the future, and could also see how great the virtual world could play a role, he could not really see the details of the virtual world. What he saw was only a rough outline of the virtual world. It was impossible to rely on everything he saw to build the virtual world according to what he saw. This was also the reason why Luo Fan needed to spend so much time and experience thinking, verifying, and creating. At this moment, after he thought through everything clearly and verified it, he used the true eyes of the sun and moon and the true ears of space-time to sense the future. He realized that everything related to the virtual world was so clear. The various details related to the construction of the virtual world, which were originally very blurry, were all vivid in his mind. This allowed him to build the virtual world according to what he saw. The subtle changes involved were mysterious and indescribably complicated. It contained the endless mysteries of the origin of space-time. Even Luo Fan, who had the deepest understanding of the mysteries of space-time in the primordial world, could not know the truth. As expected, Luo Fan activated the true eyes of the sun and moon and the true ears of space-time to the limit, developing what he could see about the future of the virtual world to the limit. After 999 yuan hui, he finally relaxed, and a faint smile appeared on his face. With Luo Fan's ability, he could only see 1 or 2 yuan hui at most when he wanted to see the future of a living being. If it was a living being he was familiar with, he might add some other information, but it would at most be about how this living being died and when there would be a major opportunity that would change its fate. It would not increase the time that he could see by too much. Chapter 428. The formation of the virtual world based on what he had seen and heard. The virtual world that he was about to build would continue to develop vigorously in the next 999 periods. It would become more and more complete in the process, and there were no signs of instability. All of this showed that the perfection of the virtual world had already reached his requirements. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed. As the void trembled, endless rays of light surged, and endless heavenly flowers formed naturally in the void. They slowly descended, and after falling for an unknown distance, they disappeared into thin air. At the same time, a strange fragrance filled the void, and the faint sound of the great Tao lingered in the void, shaking the yellow springs in a large area. Although the origin of the yellow springs did not seem very gloomy and filthy, it was condensed from heavy and turbid yin qi after all. No matter how it appeared, it would make living beings feel uncomfortable. However, at this moment, as the various phenomena appeared, the location seemed so sacred, like a fairyland. Any living being who came here would feel relaxed and happy, and the discomfort caused by the yellow springs water disappeared without a trace at this moment, as if it had never appeared in the first place. Amidst the various phenomena, an extremely mysterious that seemed to be solid yet incorporeal appeared out of thin air in front of Luo Fan, where his finger was pointing. The dot was only the size of a speck of dust, but it was extremely eye-catching. The endless phenomena around it could not hide it, and it seemed to be the center of the endless phenomena. It was as if the endless phenomena had appeared because of this speck of dust. After the small dot appeared, the range of the various phenomena in the void expanded rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had expanded from several tens of thousands of feet to several tens of thousands of miles. The small dot also gradually grew during this process. From being as small as a speck of dust, it grew to thousands of feet in the blink of an eye. At the same time, the scene inside the small dot was also revealed. It was an extremely complicated, complete world, and the laws it contained were even more complicated. Although one could clearly see every speck of dust and every law in this world, it was like a shadow, like an illusory existence. If one observed carefully, one could even see the scene of the yellow springs behind this world. This was an illusion. It was an illusion that Luo Fan was able to construct when he was comprehending the illusion Tao in the underground Blood Sea. However, the current Luo Fan was tens of thousands of times stronger than before. It was an illusion constructed using the same method, but it was completely different from the illusion he had constructed when he first comprehended the illusion doctrine. At this time, the world that this illusion showed, except for the fact that it didn't really exist between heaven and earth, everything else seemed real. Regardless of whether it was the rules or the patterns, whether it was the myriad creatures or the mountains and rivers, everything was so real. In fact, the creatures in it all possessed complete spiritual awareness, as if they were a kind of life that was born out of illusions. Such a technique was equivalent to creating another world out of thin air, a complete fantasy world that was equivalent to enriching the primordial world, adding another living being to the primordial world. At the same time, it was also because this illusion was extraordinary that the phenomenon that affected a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers appeared. Luo Fan looked at the illusion in front of him without any surprise on his face. The fact that this illusion could become so real and create another alternate world was not beyond his expectations. After thinking for tens of thousands of years, he had already thought about all the possible consequences of all the actions. It was also because of the tens of thousands of years of preparation, design, and perfection that he could construct such a realistic and wonderful illusion in an instant. Although the illusion created by Luo Fan was a complete, complicated world, it was not like the primordial world, where the sky was round and the earth was flat. Instead, it was a universe that was like the universe that Luo Fan knew in his previous life. In this universe, there were countless galaxies formed by billions of stars, and, among them, there were also thousands of times more planets. Among the endless planets, some of the planets had excellent environments and could produce countless types of living beings. However, some of the environments were too bad. They were desolate, even more desolate than the primordial world. There was not a single trace of life. Everything was similar to the universe that Luo Fan knew in his previous life. Of course, Luo Fan /S current ability was hundreds of millions of times stronger than in his previous life. After hundreds of thousands of years of perfection and balance, the perfection of a universe that he knew in the past was even more complete than the universe that he knew in his previous life. If not for that, it would not have been able to naturally produce living beings that were fake, but had an alternative form of reality. That was the foundation of the virtual world that Luo Fan wanted to build. Originally, it was not difficult for Luo Fan to build the virtual world. He could even build it at will, without any preparation. After spending hundreds of thousands of years thinking and perfecting it, this originally not difficult process was naturally minimized. The source of a netherworld network came from the Sky Observation Mirror. To build the virtual world, the Sky Observation Mirror was naturally indispensable. With a light wave of his hand, the Sky Observation Mirror rushed out from the tiny singularity. It swayed in front of him and became 1,000 feet in diameter, floating in front of Luo Fan. The endless, faintly discernible vortex above the heaven observation mirror was still rotating just like it had last time. Luo Fan looked over and seemed to be able to see the 96 million illusory worlds being created and destroyed. He also saw the wills of hundreds of thousands of innate gods comprehending and sinking in these illusory worlds. "Where's the boy?" Luo Fan shouted softly. A ray of light rushed out of the sky observation mirror and landed in front of Luo Fan. It condensed and turned into a figure. It was the sky observation child. After the sky observation child appeared, he only bowed and did not answer. Luo Fan instructed casually, "Manifest all the Netherworld network and help me set the rules." Sky observation boy bowed and casually pointed with his finger. The sky observation mirror gave off a mysterious vibration. In an instant, a boundless network that included a boundless land and a boundless sea appeared on the surface of the sky observation mirror. The network flickered according to the frequency of the oscillation. It seemed that it was precisely because of the oscillation that it was able to fully manifest. However, the network that appeared was not just an illusion. Instead, through an extremely mysterious method, with the help of the supreme power of the Great Tao, the Netherworld network in the entire primordial world was reflected in the mirror. It could shrink the boundless range, so that the changes in the network on the mirror would be transmitted to the entire Netherworld network. With this, the virtual world that needed to be scattered throughout the entire primordial world to be constructed could only be completed in the sky observation mirror in front of him. In order to achieve such a feat, he needed an existence similar to the Tai disperser to control the sky observation mirror. It was also because of this that Luo Fan let the sky observation child, who had already become a primordial unity treasure, appear and control the sky observation mirror. The sky observation child's expression was calm, but the light in his eyes gradually condensed. The frequency of the sky observation mirror's vibration became even more mysterious and unbelievable. It was also more in line with the Supreme Great Tao. The power of the Supreme Great Tao that it borrowed also became more and more powerful. At that moment, the scene of the Netherworld network that appeared in the sky observation mirror completely stabilized. It looked like it was completely engraved in the mirror. Luo Fan watched as the changes stabilized. The Tai Tao fruit in his body trembled and turned into a Dharma power. It began to circulate rapidly in his body according to a mysterious and unpredictable path. At the same time, his mind and willpower were also adhering to an incomparably complicated mantra. That was the mantra that he had specially created in the past hundreds of thousands of years for what he was doing today. As the mantra was activated, endless netherworld spring water condensed towards him. During the process, a mysterious change occurred and gradually formed 96 million crystal clear balls the size of a human head. They looked like the purest and most precious yellow jade in the world. These 12,960,000 yellow jades contained boundless energy within them. However, it was no longer the heavy and turbid yin qi. After the mysterious change, the power within had already turned into a kind of neutral, peaceful, inextinguishable power that contained endless power and could provide endless vitality. This kind of power surged and circulated endlessly in the yellow jade balls. During the process, it seemed to be evolving some supreme great Tao. At that moment, the various phenomena that appeared because of the illusion were still the same. Even the area it covered was still the same as before. It did not shrink at all. It seemed that the existence of the illusion could make the world extremely happy. Luo Fan patted his hand lightly. The illusion shook slightly and rushed towards the sky observation mirror in front of him. As if it did not take any time, the illusion directly entered the sky observation mirror in front of him. The moment the illusion entered, the entire Netherworld network shook slightly. It was as if an indescribable chaos was brewing within it. It was as if the entire Netherworld network was about to collapse. At the same time, the real Netherworld network, which was 4,900 kilometers deep under the untainted land, also changed drastically with the atmosphere. There seemed to be endless chaos brewing within it. It was as if the real netherworld network was about to undergo a drastic change. Luo Fan's movements were extremely smooth. At the moment when the chaos was about to erupt, his mind moved slightly. The 96 million yellow jade balls that floated in front of him, condensed by his self-created method, shook and rushed into the huge sky observation mirror in front of him like a torrent. Each of the yellow jade balls that rushed into the sky observation mirror had their own target. They seemed to rush in chaotically, but in reality, each of them had their own fixed target. Each of them rushed into the netherworld network and fused with the netherworld network in an extremely mysterious, exquisite, and subtle position. At that moment, the netherworld network that appeared in the sky observation mirror completely stabilized. The feeling of some kind of brewing chaos completely disappeared. At the same time, the netherworld network in the real world also stabilized. There was no longer the atmosphere of impending chaos. These yellow jade balls were not fixed in the netherworld network. Instead, they began to circulate according to an extremely complicated trajectory that seemed slow but was actually fast. In this process, an extremely mysterious connection was formed between them, and they gradually stabilized in a strange and subtle balance, forming an intricate and unpredictable whole. They supported and restrained each other, and the mysterious power they contained was even exchanged with each other through the mysterious connection, just like the circulation of qi and blood. At the moment this system stabilized, the netherworld network that Luo Fan pointed out also seemed to undergo some mysterious change. It was as if some unimaginable power was changing the rules of the netherworld network. There seemed to be an indescribable attractive force acting on all the living beings in the netherworld network. Under this indescribable attractive force, the countless tangible and intangible talisman ghosts living in the netherworld network gradually drew closer to the 96 million yellow jade balls. Like moths flying into a flame, they rushed into the yellow jade balls and disappeared. At the same time, in the illusory realm that was already compatible with the netherworld network, countless living beings that were as numerous as the invisible talisman ghosts were suddenly born. Most of these living beings were low-level living beings without intelligence. However, a small number of them were like the innate gods of the primordial world. They were born with intelligence and great power. This kind of living being that was born with the disappearance of the invisible talisman ghosts was different from the other living beings that were born in this illusory realm. Although the living beings that were naturally born in this illusory realm were very real, no matter how one looked at them, they felt that they were incompatible with the primordial world. No matter how one looked at them, they felt a little awkward. However, these newly born living beings did not feel that way at all. Even though these newborn creatures were low-grade life forms, and there were countless extremely hideous beings among them, they gave off a faint sense of familiarity. This change seemed difficult to understand, but in fact, it could not be simpler. That was because the person who was looking at this scene was Luo Fan, a living being of the primordial world. The living beings that were naturally born in this illusory realm did not originate from the primordial world. Naturally, he could feel the awkwardness. On the other hand, these newly born living beings were transformed and evolved by the invisible talisman ghosts through some extremely complicated method. The source was the primordial world. Even though they were ugly and stupid, they still gave people a sense of familiarity. When Luo Fan saw this, he smiled slightly. However, he did not stop. He raised his hand and pointed at the sky observation mirror in front of him. The Yellow Springs network that appeared in it trembled slightly, and a stream of light was instantly produced from the beginning of the Yellow Springs network and spread out at an unimaginable speed. In just a breath's time, it had already flowed through the entire Yellow Springs network once, and then it rolled back and returned to the beginning of the Yellow Springs network. As the stream of light flashed, the extremely thin threads that appeared in the Netherworld network, as well as the 12,960,000 yellow jade balls that were hidden in various parts of the Netherworld network, completely disappeared without a trace. There were no traces of human activity in the entire netherworld network. The yellow spring water flowed endlessly. It was no different from the scene in the past hundreds of thousands of years, except that almost all the invisible talisman ghosts were gathering at the 12,960,000 positions in the netherworld network and then disappearing. After preparing for hundreds of thousands of years, it was completed in just a few dozen breaths. When Luo Fan saw this scene, he could not help but sigh with emotion. With a thought, the mantra that he had already prepared slowly flowed through his mind and mind. Then it suddenly condensed into a bit of spiritual light. He pointed casually, and the spiritual light rushed out of his finger and directly rushed towards the heaven observation mirror in front of him. In the blink of an eye, it entered the heaven observation mirror in front of him and instantly rushed into the netherworld network. After the spiritual light rushed in, countless words exploded and flowed endlessly in the netherworld network, gradually merging into it. At the same time, in the entire primordial world, from underground at the bottom of the sea and where the netherworld network was, there were indistinct sounds that could be heard clearly by all living beings. Amidst these sounds, he was reciting a mantra that only had a few dozen words. These sounds echoed in the entire primordial world. As long as the netherworld network passed through, no matter where it was, no matter how far it was from Bujo Mountain, no matter how hidden its location was, no matter whether there was a defensive formation or not, this mantra could be heard. It was even more so in the space-time illusion. Although this mantra only had a few dozen words, each word was meticulously carved. When combined, it contained endless mysteries. It also had a power that went straight into the depths of the living being's spiritual senses. It could allow any living being who heard this sound to remember this mantra in the depths of their spiritual senses, regardless of whether this living being had a complete spiritual sense or not, regardless of whether this living being had perfect intelligence or not. After hearing this mantra, the entire primordial world instantly fell into a strange atmosphere. It was as if this voice was the only thing left in the world reciting this mantra over and over again. Chapter 429. Chapter 469 of the W Duty of Guarding. Setting strange ability in this world. Apart from Luo Fan, there was no other living being who could transmit his voice to the entire primordial world. In an instant, tens of thousands of innate gods comprehended the profoundness of this mantra. Although this mantra contained endless mysteries, the difficulty of cultivating it was extremely simple. Even living beings who did not know its profoundness could easily cultivate it according to the requirements of this mantra. At this moment, almost at the same time, hundreds of thousands of living beings used this mantra at the same time. An unimaginable change suddenly appeared out of thin air. In the heaven-observing mirror in front of Luo Fan, hundreds of thousands of thoughts suddenly appeared out of thin air. These hundreds of thousands of thoughts directly entered the netherworld network in the center. The moment they came into contact with the netherworld network, an extremely mysterious change occurred, and they disappeared without a trace. Seeing this, Luo Fan knew that the virtual world had finally taken shape. He smiled, and with a thought, the heaven-observing mirror trembled slightly, and the scene that appeared in the mirror changed. The originally huge netherworld network disappeared without a trace. What replaced it was a boundless, incomparably pitch-black universe dotted with stars. This universe was the virtual world that Luo Fan had spent hundreds of thousands of years thinking, but it only took him a moment to condense. At this moment, in this virtual world, hundreds of thousands of streams of light were born from nothingness. They left long trajectories in the void and shot towards all corners of the virtual world. In the end, they either landed on planets, landed in stars, entered black holes, or attached themselves to meteorites or comets. There were even some that directly stopped in the void after flying for an unknown distance. After these streams of light arrived at their respective positions, they stopped and finally revealed the truth of these streams of light. They were living beings one after another. These living beings had all sorts of strange shapes. Only a very few of them were humanoid, but most of them were in the form of various living beings in the primordial world. After these living beings took shape, they seemed to be very surprised and confused. They looked around and only came back to their senses after a long time. Some were overjoyed, some were shocked, and some were even stunned speechless. These living beings seemed to have physical bodies, and even in this virtual world, they were indeed complete physical bodies. But in fact, under the effect of the rules of this virtual world, they were condensed by the thoughts of the living beings who cultivated the mantra. Among them, only a small portion were innate gods. Most of them were postnatal living beings, vegetation spirits, or innate gods who were hazy and did not have complete spiritual consciousness at all. They looked very dumb and stupid. That section of the mantra was equivalent to a port. When a living being cultivated this section of the mantra, it would naturally fuse its mind and spirit with the virtual world in the Yellow Springs network, establishing an extremely mysterious and mystical connection. This connection caused a projection of that living being to be established in this virtual world. At the same time, a part of the living being's mind would be attached to this projection, making it seem like a second body that could be completely controlled by the living being. It could also survive in this virtual world as if it was in the real world. After those innate gods with complete spiritual consciousness came here, they were stunned for a long or short time. Then, they began to explore around, constantly testing what this virtual world was and what rules it had. In an instant, this virtual world, which was originally quite lively, became even more lively. In this process, more and more living beings cultivated the mantra that Luo Fan had spread to the world. Therefore, more and more streams of light appeared from the void and formed long streams of light in the void. They came to a certain place in the void and stopped, forming their bodies. The streams of light were endless. In a short while, it had increased to more than 10 billion. Even though such a huge number of streams of light did not appear at the same time, the number was still there. Even though the sky observation mirror in front of him was so huge, it still seemed like it was raining. Under the illumination of countless streams of light, it even made Luo Fan feel slightly dazzled. Among these more than 10 billion streams of light, there were many innate gods that Luo Fan had never met or cared about in the untainted world. But many of them, or even more, were postnatal living beings who had ascended from Luo Fan's spirit space and were under the command of Luo Fan's disciple, Lin Tian Nan. It had been thousands of years since Luo Fan taught Lin Tian in the formation of 1 billion formation points. During this time, although these ascenders spent most of their time practicing that formation, they also had their necessary ordinary lives. Naturally, there was a lot of growth in the population. At this time, the number of ascenders and their descendants had increased to nearly 2 billion, which was more than double the previous number. The mind mantra that Luo Fan had just spread to the entire untainted world was transmitted through the underground Yellow Spring. In this world, as long as there was a connection with the Yellow Spring, no matter what kind of formation it was, it could hear the voice chanting this mind mantra. It was naturally the same for those ascenders and their descendants. The source of these living beings was from Luo Fan's spirit space. In this vast and endless untainted world, after leaving the protective formation set up by Luo Fan, they did not even have the ability to walk on their own. As long as there was bad weather, they might not be able to bear it. This made their pursuit of strength incomparable to that of any innate gods. Therefore, after hearing this very short but seemingly extremely mysterious mind mantra, almost everyone directly practiced this mind mantra. It was also because of this that these living beings were able to descend their consciousness into this virtual world so quickly. This virtual world had taken Luo Fan hundreds of thousands of years to design. The various rules and details had long been detailed to the point where there were almost no flaws. As soon as these living beings who had entered this virtual world came to their senses, they felt that this place was completely different from the untainted world, but it was equally vast. During this process, The invisible talisman ghost also entered this virtual world through the 12,960,000 yellow jade balls, evolving the infinite living beings in this virtual world. They were different from the living beings who had practiced Luo Fan's mind mantra. They had entered with their real bodies, which was equivalent to completely changing their living environment and completely abandoning their original living environment. If they died in this virtual world, there would be nothing and everything would be for naught. However, the situation was different for those living beings who had only entered this virtual world through projections. They had only entered this virtual world as a projection. Moreover, although this projection carried their minds and made it seem as if they had another body, the destruction of this projection, the death of this projection, and the disappearance of this projection would not affect them much. At most, it would only make them feel that their minds were slightly hurt. As a result, these two kinds of living beings were fundamentally different. When Luo Fan saw this, he smiled slightly and raised his hand to grab at the air. As the void distorted, the figure of an old man gradually appeared in front of him. This old man had white hair and a ruddy complexion. His eyes were deep and seemed to contain the mysteries of everything, as well as the endless determination to pursue the Tao. It was the thorn that had visualized the primordial spirit in Luo Fan's appearance. The moment the thorn appeared, there was a section of dragon's thorn that was rooted in a black hole in the virtual world. It trembled slightly and stopped, as if it had turned into a statue that had lost its soul. At the same time, there seemed to be a force in the virtual world that was attached to the dragon thorn, completely isolating the dragon thorn from the outside world. Even light couldn't touch the dragon thorn. If Luo Fan did not have the true eyes of the sun and moon and the true space-time ear, he might not have been able to see the dragon's thorn. The dragon's thorn was naturally the projection of the thorn in this virtual world. Luo Fan had stayed in the infinite void palace for hundreds of thousands of years, but for the thorn, it had stayed in the space-time illusion for more than 365 years. During this period of time, it had long been enough for the thorn to stabilize its perfected immortal realm. Today, when he suddenly heard Luo Fan's voice reciting the mental cultivation method's mnemonic chant, he naturally wouldn't hesitate and immediately cultivated that portion of the mental cultivation method's mnemonic chant. Naturally, a projection appeared in this virtual world. When the thorn was feeling the huge and vast virtual world, it suddenly felt its body move. When its mind returned to its body, it saw Luo Fan. At that moment, it was not surprised. It bowed to Luo Fan and said, "Greetings, Tao Lord." At this time, it had already stabilized its primordial spirit and his cultivation realm at the perfected immortal realm. When facing Luo Fan, it naturally would not be like before. When it approached Luo Fan, its psyche would collapse because its primordial spirit was visualizing Luo Fan's figure. Its psyche would be transformed into Luo Fan's body. Precisely because of this, Luo Fan directly moved the thorn in front of him. Looking at the thorn, Luo Fan sighed, but did not say much. He only directly said, "In order to make it easier for fellow cultivators to communicate, I have opened up a virtual world based on the Yellow Springs network. However, this huge network is too intricate and needs someone to protect it. Fellow cultivators' primordial spirit has an extremely close connection with the Yellow Springs network, so I can protect this network. Is fellow cultivator willing?" The thorn analyzed it and combined it with all the information it knew about the Yellow Springs network in the past. In an instant, it already knew what benefits protecting the Yellow Springs network would bring to it. It immediately nodded and said, "This is exactly what I wanted. Thank you, Tao Lord." Luo Fan looked at it. His expression did not change, and his eyes did not move. He said, "In that case, I will pass the essence of the Yellow Springs network to fellow cultivator. I hope it will help fellow cultivator protect the Yellow Springs network." Then, with a thought, countless lights of wisdom flashed in his mind. Countless complicated characters, images, talismans, patterns, runes, and all kinds of other things flowed down like the Milky Way from the 9 heavens descending to the mortal world. Under the control of his will, they quickly condensed into a speck of light. After this speck of light appeared, Luo Fan casually pointed. The light shot out from his finger and flew toward the thorn. In the blink of an eye, it arrived in front of the thorn and stopped moving. Jitu looked at the spiritual light and raised his hand to grab it. The spiritual light drilled into his palm and rushed up along the meridians in his body. In the blink of an eye, it rushed into his sea of consciousness and fused with Luo Fan's primordial spirit. The endless information contained within was instantly received by the thorn. So, the most important thing is the 12,960,000 balls of agreement. After learning this information, a flash of understanding appeared in Jitu's eyes. He already knew what the most important thing was to protect the Yellow Springs network. Then, a hint of joy appeared on his face. After deeply reading the information passed to him by Luo Fan, he found that the benefits of protecting the Yellow Springs network were greater than he had imagined. If he could continue like this, he would be able to increase his cultivation by several times. Protecting the Yellow Springs network was naturally not an easy task. If it was Luo Fan, it would be fine. With just a thought, every position of the Yellow Springs network would appear in his mind. Then, he could easily eliminate any harmful changes to the Yellow Springs network with the help of the Sky Observation Mirror. After all, the Yellow Springs network was refined by him, and the Sky Observation Mirror was the core of it. However, for other creatures, even the innate deities in the realm of Tai dispersal number, which was impossible to exist, couldn't do this. For Jitu, even if he visualized Luo Fan's appearance as his own primordial spirit, there was no exception unless there was a special method. Because of this, if Jitu wanted to protect the Yellow Springs network and the virtual world, he needed to have a deep understanding of the Yellow Springs network. He needed to completely master every secret of the Yellow Springs network. He even needed to get the approval of the Sky Observation Child before he could cooperate with the Sky Observation Child to eliminate all kinds of accidents that could affect the safety of the Yellow Springs network. The information contained the mysteries of the Yellow Springs network, the interaction between it and the Sky Observation Mirror, and the operating principles of the Yellow Springs network. Apart from that, the most important thing was the mysteries of the virtual world. The virtual world itself was an illusion. Although the principles of its construction were a little complicated, it was only a deeper understanding of the formation doctrine and illusory doctrine. Although Jitu was surprised by the formation of the virtual world and felt that it was inconceivable, he could still understand it. He even felt that if he continued to work hard in this direction, he would be able to do it one day. What shocked him the most was that he even felt a sense of admiration for Luo Fan. He felt that even if he immersed himself in the virtual world in the future, the incredible realm of the Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal, it would not be comparable to Luo Fan's understanding at this time. What he knew was that this virtual world was incomparably complete and balanced, and even made him feel like he was facing the untainted world. The complete and balanced setting of the rules occupied almost 90% of the divine light that Luo Fan had passed to him. If it was translated into words, it would be impossible to record it in tens of trillions of words. If all these words were recorded in books in the size of ants, these books could probably fill up the void with a circumference of millions of feet. The amount of information contained in it was earth-shattering. If Jitu had not visualized his primordial spirit to look like Luo Fan, and with the help of Luo Fan's cultivation results, he would have been protected by heaven and earth. If the information in the divine light burst out, his primordial spirit might have directly exploded, and his mind would have been completely devoured by the information, and finally transformed into a living ancient book. These rules and settings involved all aspects of this virtual world. They determined the orbit of every celestial body, determined the rules by which any living creature would live, age, get sick, and die, and how they would affect the entire virtual world. They also stipulated how the living creatures projected from the untainted world could interact with this virtual world, and how they could communicate with each other in a way that was countless times better than the untainted world These kinds of rules were hundreds of millions of times more complete and complicated than the D&D rules that Luo Fan knew in his previous life. Moreover, as long as these rules were completely engraved on some kind of information carrier, over time, this carrier could give rise to an incomparably real and complete world that was completely in line with these rules under the inconceivable effects of the rules. What an astonishing mind, what a perfect way of thinking. How deep must one's understanding of heaven and earth be to be able to create such a perfect rule setting? Only this indescribable shock was constantly circulating in G2's mind. As he continued to comprehend and understand these rules, the world in his sea of consciousness also underwent some inexplicable changes. This change was not controlled by his mind, but was natural. It was completely formed by the change in his worldview and the change in his understanding of heaven and earth. The incomparably perfect rule setting that went deep into every detail and was even more real than the real world completely suppressed G2's understanding of the untainted world and the mysteries of the rules that G2 had comprehended for tens of thousands of years in the past. As G2's understanding of this rule setting deepened, it gradually displayed its incredible power, causing G2's sea of consciousness to become more and more similar to the virtual world. During this process, the size of his sea of consciousness began to constantly expand, as if it was being stretched by some invisible force. Chapter 430. Entering the void unknowingly. G2's sea of consciousness had grown to twice its original size. At this time, although the special ability of the rules still existed and was still changing his sea of consciousness, the expanding force had gradually disappeared. Although this rule setting was mysterious, it was after all limited by G2's cultivation realm, limited by his foundation. Naturally, it could not be used endlessly. It could not really open up G2's sea of consciousness into a world as vast and limitless as the virtual world. However, this was already an extremely pleasant surprise for G2's day. After an unknown period of time, G2 recovered from the extremely complicated setting of the rules and finally discovered that his sea of consciousness had transformed into the appearance of the boundless universe. An indescribable joy emerged in his mind. The rules actually have such a special ability. I'm afraid it has already become another way of cultivating the sea of consciousness. G2 sighed with emotion as he rejoiced. He returned to his senses and bowed towards Luo Fan. G2 is ready. I'm ready to take on the responsibility at any time. Luo Fan stood in front of G2's day. Even if G2 was any other innate god, he could sense all the changes that happened in G2's body with a single thought. Moreover, G2's soul had already taken on his appearance, so there was a mysterious connection between him and G2's soul. Under such circumstances, he didn't even need to think about it. The mysterious connection would reflect all the changes that happened to the spike into his mind, allowing him to easily sense it. Therefore, at this moment, Luo Fan completely understood the changes that happened to G2 during that period of time. It was beyond Luo Fan's expectation that the rules would have such a miraculous ability. Luo Fan had made such a complicated and perfect rule setting just to confirm the operating rules of the virtual world. This rule setting would naturally resonate with the primordial world, causing the boundless power of the world to naturally respond. Although he had thought of this before, he did not really calculate it. At this moment, seeing that the rule setting brought such benefits to G2, he could only sigh. However, he did not intend to pass this rule setting to his disciples as a kind of freedom. G2's experience could not be replicated. The special ability of the rules setting was naturally astonishing. However, it was based on the fact that G2's soul had already transformed into Luo Fan's appearance. If it wasn't for this foundation, G2's primordial spirit would have exploded the moment the rules entered his primordial spirit, causing his consciousness to completely disappear. His primordial spirit would then turn into a living book that recorded the rules of the rules. Some of Luo Fan's disciples had cultivations that were stronger than G2, But even so, the information capacity of their divine souls couldn't compare to G2 at this time. If these rules were to enter their divine souls, let alone expanding their sea of consciousness, their divine souls would directly explode. With this kind of freedom, naturally, they could not cultivate using the rules as a freedom. Therefore, Luo Fan also nodded and raised his hand to point at G2's day. A mysterious power emerged out of thin air, and the great wilderness naturally produced some kind of change. An existence similar to the authority of heaven and earth was added to G2's body, along with Luo Fan's finger. In the blink of an eye, G2 felt as if something wonderful had happened to him. This change was extremely obscure and subtle. It seemed to exist in every detail of his body, but it also seemed to only exist outside of his body. He could clearly feel this change happening, but he could not really grasp this change, and could not put this change into words. Then, G2 felt that the connection between him and the Yellow Springs network in front of him was more than 10,000 times closer than before. The range of his divine sense, an invisible perception born from his soul, in the Yellow Springs network had increased by more than hundreds of thousands of times. Originally, his divine sense could only reach a radius of tens of thousands of miles, but now it could cover a radius of billions of miles. G2 felt an incomparably relaxed feeling welling up in his heart. With a thought, his divine sense had already spread to a radius of billions of miles, and the Yellow Springs within a radius of billions of miles were included in his absolute perception. All the fluctuations of the spring water, the energy fluctuations, and the movement rules of the invisible talisman ghosts were clearly displayed in his mind, and not a single trace was left out. This feeling was so wonderful that G2 could not help but tremble slightly. According to G2's primordial spirit's great Tao, this ability could only be achieved when he became at least a primordial unity, golden immortal. At this time, he was only in the realm of true immortal, and there were still 4 realms between him and the primordial unity, golden immortal. That was a world of difference, like the difference between an ant and a divine dragon. How could G2 not be excited? Unfortunately, this range of perception could only be limited to the Yellow Springs network. He could not sense any other location, even if it was just a line away from the Yellow Springs network. The range of perception for other substances was still the same as before, but there was still some imperfection. After the excitement, G2 sighed slightly. But it was just a sigh. It was already a great opportunity to enjoy the perception ability of a primordial unity, golden immortal in advance, and it had countless benefits for his cultivation. How could he be greedy for more? Thank you, Tao Master. G2 calmed down and bowed to Luo Fan. Luo Fan looked indifferent and said, "This virtual world is not only a platform for many living beings in the untainted world to communicate with each other, but also an important force when the great tribulation of heaven and earth comes in the future. Don't take it lightly, Tao Master." G2 understands, Tao Master. Don't worry. G2 was already respectful. Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled slightly and said, "In that case, I'll leave this place to you, Tao Master. This is Sky Watcher, the treasure spirit of the Sky Watcher Mirror. He will definitely help you in the future." Hearing this, G2 thanked him, and then turned to bow to Sky Watcher, who was controlling the trembling Yellow Springs network in the Sky Watcher Mirror. Sky Watcher controlled the Sky Watcher Mirror to tremble continuously, as if he was controlling his own body, but did not consume too much energy. Seeing G2 bowing, he bowed back expressionlessly. At that moment, he supported G2's day. Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled slightly. With a thought, the Sky Watcher mirror shook slightly, and the Yellow Springs network that appeared on it instantly disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Countless obvious vortexes appeared on the Sky Watcher mirror again, but they did not damage the surface of the Sky Watcher mirror and did not affect the function of the Sky Watcher mirror at all. At the same time, Sky Watcher Child understood Luo Fan's intention. He stopped controlling the Sky Watcher mirror and stood aside with his head lowered. Luo Fan did not care about Sky Watcher Child, and pressed down lightly. The huge Sky Watcher mirror in front of him slowly flew backward, and in the process, it kept shrinking. In a short while, it had shrunk to a point that was thousands of times smaller than a speck of dust, and rushed into a singularity in the center of the Yellow Springs network. It once again completely merged with the Yellow Springs network and could no longer be found. G2 looked at the change in front of him, but his eyes did not change. Although the change in front of him was mysterious, it was nothing compared to the strange ability that could make the primordial world respond naturally with just a set of rules and increase his sea of consciousness by twice its original size. After Luo Fan did all of that, the entire Yellow Springs network had been restored to its original state before it was refined by Luo Fan. The lines that were originally extremely small but widely distributed in every branch of the Yellow Springs and the entire primordial world had long been hidden in the Yellow Springs. No matter what cultivation level the Khanate god was at, as long as he did not understand the mysteries of the Yellow Springs network, it was impossible for him to see these small lines, the foundation of the trial world. Seeing this, Luo Fan nodded slightly at G2 and took a step forward. In a flash, he had already left the Yellow Springs network and disappeared in front of G2 and Sky Watcher Child, as if he had never appeared. After Luo Fan left, G2 said to Sky Watcher Child, "Taoism friend Guan Tian, we don't have much time. Taoist master's instructions are the most important. Can you open the portal to the virtual world?" Sky Watcher Child looked calm and indifferent. He nodded and said, "As you wish." "Thank you, Taoism friend Guan Tian." G2 bowed to Sky Watcher Child politely. Sky Watcher Child did not care. He waved his hand. An array of light suddenly appeared out of thin air. It instantly condensed into a light curtain of 30 feet high and 10 feet wide in front of G2's day. There seemed to be an infinite aura in this light curtain, as if there was a huge world behind it. Without hesitation, G2 took a step forward and directly crashed into the light curtain. The light curtain flickered rapidly after G2 crashed into it. The frequency of the flickering was extremely mysterious, as if it contained some kind of indescribable mystery of heaven and earth. Under this flickering, the void seemed to produce some mysterious distortion, creating something similar to a space channel that connected to a mysterious place. Then, the light curtain gradually shrank and finally disappeared without a trace. Sky Gazer's expression did not change, and he did not hesitate at all. After the light screen disappeared, he took a step forward and disappeared from the underworld. He had returned to the Sky Gazer mirror. After Sky Watcher Child disappeared, the Yellow Spring was completely calm. Apart from the countless invisible talisman ghosts that were gathering and disappearing at a certain location, it looked no different from the past hundreds of thousands of years. The Yellow Spring water was still flowing, and the endless heavy and turbidine chi was still seeping out from the ground into the source of the Yellow Spring. It was changed by some mysterious power and turned into the spring water of the Yellow Spring, replenishing the spring water of the Yellow Spring that flowed endlessly into the endless distance. The moment his spikes crashed into the light screen, he felt an incomparably mysterious force suddenly acting on his body. Every cell in his body, every bit of his vital energy, his sea of consciousness, and his primordial spirit were rapidly transforming in an unbelievable direction under the effect of this mysterious and profound power. In the blink of an eye, he had transformed into a completely different form of life. He seemed to be completely illusory, without any substance, power, or weight. However, he seemed to be incomparably real, possessing a body that was even more real, more powerful, and heavier than before. This feeling was so strange that even G2, who already knew the mystery, could not help but be amazed. After obtaining Luo Fan's knowledge of the structure of the virtual world, G2 had a rough idea of how to perfectly protect the Yellow Springs network. At the same time, he could not delay his own cultivation. This virtual world was originally just an illusion. Generally speaking, it was already very rare for such an existence to bear the will of living beings. However, in this virtual world, Luo Fan had set up extremely perfect and complicated rules. In fact, just these rules alone could cause the primordial world to resonate. How could an illusion created with the help of these rules be an ordinary illusion? This virtual world was, in fact, a real world built on another foundation. Bearing the will of living beings was not a problem for him at all. It was just a small problem for him to bear the will of real living beings. If G2 wanted to protect the carrier of this virtual world, the best way was naturally to immerse himself in it. With his understanding of the rules of the entire virtual world, he could completely grasp every change in this virtual world. At that moment, the changes that were happening to his body were the result of his body transforming into an existence that was between real and fake under the mysterious power of the virtual world. It formed an existence that was completely real compared to the virtual world. In fact, this change was somewhat similar to the change when the endless invisible talisman ghosts entered the virtual world. However, the invisible talisman ghosts could only be used once. After entering, they would completely merge with the virtual world, and they would not be able to leave unless they died and collapsed. On the other hand, G2 could reverse the changes at any time and leave at any time. However, he was not connected to his life. In the blink of an eye, G2 had already appeared in a boundless void of the universe. The place where he appeared happened to be next to the black hole where his will was born when he entered the virtual world. The rules of this virtual world were so complete and strict that even the creator, Luo Fan, would have to spend a lot of effort to surpass these rules, let alone G2, who had only completely understood the rules. To him, this virtual world was a completely real world. There were many rules in this virtual world, and he could not do any of them. Standing next to the huge black hole, G2 felt an indescribable attractive force acting on his body, trying to pull his body into the black hole. G2's face showed a mixture of joy and worry. With a thought, he separated a bit of his will and instantly entered the dragon thorn that was rooted in the black hole. In an instant, he felt that he had two bodies. One of them was his original body, the body that looked like an old man at this time. The other was the huge plant that almost ignored the infinite attractive force of the black hole. No wonder this body has become so huge and powerful. G2 could not help but admire the settings of Dao Master Luo Fan. Without this huge and powerful body, an innate god like G2 would be as weak as an ant in this virtual world. Not to mention moving freely in this virtual universe. It might not even be able to leave the place where it was born. With a thought, the dragon thorn in the black hole shook, and a branch rushed out of the black hole at an unimaginable speed. In an instant, it came to G2's side, and like a mountain that was hundreds of thousands of feet high and covered with countless spikes, it appeared under G2's feet. G2's body shook, and he landed on one of the branches. Gradually, it turned into a liquid and gradually seeped into the branch. With this change, the feeling that G2 had of two bodies completely disappeared. All that was left was an indescribable power. The black hole that was emitting a gravitational force that could even attract light seemed so weak to him. He only needed to struggle a little, and he could easily break free from the gravitational force. He could even send out his branches at will, waving them around the black hole like an octopus's tentacles. He even had a feeling that he could leave this black hole at will. At this point, G2 was completely relieved. He began to carefully observe this virtual world according to the rules set by Luo Fan. The speed of time in this virtual world was different from that in the untainted land, and it was not uniform. The most common thing in this world was the speed of time in the endless void. It was not much, only 12 times faster than that in the untainted land. However, there was no limit to the speed of time in other places. For example, the speed of time in the singularity inside the black hole, where G2 was, might be more than 3,000 times faster than that in the untainted land. In the interior of other larger black holes or other strange stars, the speed of time might be even faster. Of course, it could also be the other way around. In this virtual world, there are all kinds of virtual essence chi, virtual chaotic essence chi, virtual innate essence chi, virtual astral chi, virtual evil chi, and so on. Almost all the essence chi that could be found in the untainted land existed in this virtual world. However, the virtual essence chi was not evenly distributed throughout the virtual world. Although the distribution of the various essence chi in the untainted land was not uniform, it was only a matter of the amount of essence chi. No matter where it was, the only difference was that there was more essence chi. The distribution of the virtual essence chi in this virtual world was completely different. The distribution of the virtual essence chi was divided into existence and non-existence. Wherever the virtual yuan chi existed, the yuan chi would be condensed into a solid state, just like how there was a tiny singularity inside this black hole, where the virtual chaotic yuan chi and the virtual innate yuan chi had condensed into a special space. Chapter 431. The Great Changes of the Primordial World with a Thought. G2 had a strange feeling. It was as if a network of billions of light spots had appeared in his mind. Each of these light spots contained unimaginable vitality, as if they were independent and autonomous living beings. G2 understood in the blink of an eye that this was the will of all the living beings from the primordial world that had entered the virtual world. As long as he was willing, he could contact any living being through these light spots at any time. Of course, it was also because of this that the spikes were unable to accurately connect with a single living being. After all, there's simply too many living beings. Because there were too many choices, it was instead impossible to differentiate them. However, this was not a problem under the rules of the virtual world. As long as the aura of a living being remained in his heart, he could easily bypass the choice of billions of living beings and directly connect with that living being. This was one of the most basic characteristics of the virtual world. It was precisely because of this characteristic that the virtual world could be used as a carrier for the living beings of the primordial world to communicate with each other. If not for this characteristic, the virtual world would not be much different from the primordial world. There would not be much difference between coming here and the primordial world. How could it reduce the difficulty of communicating with living beings? G2 pondered. With a thought, he sensed that there were 96 million square meters of virtual world hidden in the depths of the virtual world. It seemed as if he could directly enter the 96 million square meters of virtual world to train and cultivate with just a thought. This was also a characteristic of the virtual world. The virtual world was built based on the Netherworld network. After being refined by Luo Fan previously, the Netherworld network had long been integrated with the trial world. The construction of the virtual world naturally could not eliminate the trial world. In fact, during Luo Fan's pondering and deduction, the 96 million square meters of virtual world had long become an extremely important part of the virtual world. It was almost equivalent to the foundation of the virtual world. Without the 96 million square meters of virtual world, the integration of the virtual world and the Netherworld network would not have reached such a level without a trace. The spikes slowly tested the various functions of the virtual world one by one. The more he tested, the more he admired Luo Fan. The rules of this virtual world were too exquisite and perfect. After spending dozens of days testing nonstop, G2 still couldn't find any flaws in it. At that moment, he felt that the virtual world was so real. If the rules were not set in his memory, if he had not seen the true appearance of the virtual world, he might have long regarded the virtual world as another world on the same level as the primordial world. You already know this. Why are you sighing with emotion? A few dozen days later, G2 couldn't help but laugh. In his memory was the perfect rules of this virtual world, down to the most minute details. All the tests that he had done previously were included in it. Naturally, no matter how he tested, he wouldn't be able to find any flaws. In fact, according to his testing method, he might not be able to finish testing all the rules even after hundreds or thousands of years. let alone find any loopholes in the rules. With a thought, G2 directly locked his mind on the tens of billions of light spots that appeared in his mind. In an instant, he felt as if he was facing tens of billions of people. The appearances and voices of tens of billions of living beings appeared in his mind, replacing the tens of billions of light spots. With G2's current cultivation level of the perfected immortal realm, it was quite difficult for his mind to accommodate so many images and voices. Fortunately, he could still bear it. When G2 locked his mind on these living beings, G2's figure also appeared in the minds of the tens of billions of living beings. Communication was a two-way street. The reason why these living beings were muddle-headed and didn't know how to communicate with each other was because they had just arrived here and didn't know the rules of this virtual world. They didn't know that such incredible things could be done in such a realistic virtual world. At that moment, the image of G2 suddenly appeared in his mind. Almost in an instant, hundreds of millions of living beings understood one of the most basic functions and characteristics of this virtual world. The rest of the living beings didn't understand this function and characteristics. Except for some living beings with relatively slow reactions, most of the remaining living beings didn't have complete spiritual consciousness and didn't have complete wisdom. G2 secretly sensed and found tens of thousands of living beings that he was familiar with. There were also hundreds of thousands of living beings that he knew, but they didn't know him. After all, G2 had lived in the space-time illusion for tens of thousands of years. Even the innate gods in this space-time illusion cultivated wholeheartedly and didn't have much contact with them. But after a long time, even G2 had become familiar with tens of thousands of innate gods. As for the other innate gods that he knew, but they didn't know him, most of them were selected by Luo Fan, and some of them were occasionally mentioned by others, but they didn't have the chance to meet him. G2 smiled faintly. With a thought, he sent a greeting to these creatures he knew. In an instant, he received a response. Along with these responses, there were many doubts about this virtual world and about why G2 knew more than them. G2 gestured slightly and directly said to the tens of billions of living beings, whether they had complete spiritual consciousness or not, this virtual world is rooted in the Yellow Spring Network. It was created by Tao Master Luo Fan because he felt that it was difficult for many living beings in the untainted land to communicate with each other. As long as you practice the mantra that resounded throughout the entire untainted land, you can form a projection of your mind in this world and cultivate and survive in this virtual world. Of course, most importantly, there's a mysterious connection between living beings in this virtual world. Any living being only needs a single thought to be able to contact any other living being. Right now, I'm using this method to contact all of you. I'm sure that all of you have already sensed it. My name is G2, and I'm valued by Tao Master Luo Fan. He gave me the title of Mighty Being, and I'm the guardian of the foundation of this virtual world. If you have any questions, you can ask me, and I'll try my best to answer them. As G2 finished speaking, many living beings without complete spiritual consciousness and intelligence naturally didn't have much reaction. But those innate gods, ascended descendants, and other living beings were stunned for a while, and then countless questions rushed towards G2's day. These were all questions about the rules of this virtual world. After G2 reached the realm of perfected immortality, it was extremely easy for him to multitask, but he could only multitask tens of thousands of times at most. Even G2 couldn't fully understand the hundreds of millions of questions rushing to him at the same time. He only felt a buzzing in his ears, and even his thoughts were almost drowned. Seeing this, G2 hurriedly shouted to stop the many questions from continuing to rush to him. With a helpless expression, he said, "Fellow Taoists, please understand. Because of this, I'm connected to all the living beings from the untainted world. There are too many living beings, and if they ask me at the same time, it's difficult for me to hear your questions clearly. Besides, there are some questions that don't need me to answer. You just need to familiarize yourself with it a little, and you'll understand. I hope you could try your best to understand and understand me. Apart from explaining this virtual world to you, I'm abruptly contacting you this time to remind you to add a judgment rule to your spiritual consciousness. It's best to judge your aura. That way, you can avoid being accidentally disturbed by others. When the living beings heard G2's words, they slowly came back to their senses. Some of them smiled embarrassedly, while others were suddenly enlightened. Although this virtual world was set up to allow living beings to communicate better, it was impossible to let any living being who didn't know each other easily contact each other without any restrictions. Communication without restrictions would only cause chaos, not convenience. This fact was not difficult for many living beings to understand. Therefore, after G2 finished speaking, many living beings already understood what he meant. Seeing that many living beings understood his words, G2 was relieved. He explained the rules set by Luo Fan about how to add judgment rules to one's spiritual consciousness. The method was actually not difficult. One only needed to connect one's mind with the void and make some slight settings, and the virtual world would naturally add judgment rules to one's spiritual consciousness. For most living beings, their spiritual consciousness was like what G2 had said, the aura of other living beings. The aura of any two living beings was completely different. Even living beings who cultivated the same cultivation method could not have the same aura. Precisely because of this, aura could be used as proof of a living being's identity. Using the aura as the judgment rule prevented G2 from unilaterally connecting himself with all other living beings from happening again. After those living beings added a judgment rule to their spiritual consciousness, most of them directly added G2's aura to their judgment rules. So that from now on, G2's connection would not be isolated by this judgment rule. G2 had already expected this situation, so he did not care. He also added some judgment rules to his spiritual consciousness. However, this judgment rule was different from the judgment rules for other living beings. In addition to the same judgment of aura, there was also an additional message platform. This kind of message platform also existed in the settings of the rules. As long as the judgment was slightly changed, G2 would be able to choose whether or not to accept the contact of other living beings who had not added their aura to his spiritual consciousness. After all these settings were set, tens of thousands of living beings disappeared from G2's perception. Those were the living beings who did not add G2's aura to their judgment rules. There were hundreds of them, and they came in all shapes and sizes. Most of the living beings felt that it was a good thing to keep in touch with G2, an existence that guarded the virtual world, while many others felt that it was unnecessary. G2 did not care about this change. After explaining for a while more, he cut off the connection. Instead, he exchanged his aura with the friends he knew, just like how Luo Fan exchanged phone numbers with his friends in his previous life. What G2 explained was only the most basic function of this virtual world, and even then, he only explained the most basic application of this function. However, among the billions of living beings with complete spiritual consciousness and intelligence, there are simply too many intelligent beings to count. As long as the most basic application was introduced, the various functions of this virtual world were discovered by many living beings at a speed that surpassed all imagination. Moreover, the speed at which they were discovered was getting faster and faster. After dozens of days, a rather perfect system had been formed. The spiritual consciousness network that G2 explained could only allow companions and friends to communicate more easily had undergone earth-shaking changes. It had become a powerful tool for gathering living beings with similar thoughts. All kinds of functions that G2 did not explain were continuously developed. The virtual network that originally only existed in the minds of many living beings became an indispensable existence in the lives of many living beings at a considerable speed. Among them, the simplest method of application was to add many special judgment rules to the various auras. These special judgment rules allowed more and more living beings to understand each other's thoughts. Gradually, they became familiar with each other, and from being strangers, they became close friends, and from being unrelated to each other, they became close friends. In the entire primordial world, The relationship between all living beings was increasing explosively. One organization after another was established. Many living beings who had the same pursuit, the same goal, or the same thoughts recognized each other and knew of each other's existence. They also understood that they were not alone in the primordial world. They knew that there were many people in the world who had the same thoughts and the same goal as them. This kind of change caused their mentality to gradually change. Some were even more certain of their goals. Some understood their own mistakes through communication, and some even improved their own cultivation through this kind of understanding. Unknowingly, an increasingly powerful vitality was emitted from the virtual world. Almost every living being who entered the virtual world felt joy from the bottom of their hearts. They were extremely glad that they could step into this virtual world. At the same time, they felt endless gratitude to Luo Fan, who had created this virtual world. The flow of time in the virtual world was different from that of the primordial world. This characteristic had long been known by many living beings. Even the fact that there were many places in this virtual world where the flow of time was different was made known through the interactions between the many living beings. For the innate gods who lived in the illusion of space-time, the change in the flow of time was not too shocking. Most of them had enjoyed this strange characteristic for tens of thousands of years. However, for those living beings who had never entered the illusion of space-time, such as the descendants of the living beings who had ascended from the Kiliacosm, the situation was extremely magical. This made them pay more attention to the virtual world. In fact, even without the change in the flow of time, the descendants of the living beings who had ascended from the Kiliacosm could not give up the virtual world. Because of the existence of the virtual world, these living beings realized that the primordial world was so vast. Only then did they realize how small they were. Similarly, it was precisely because of the existence of this virtual world that they had more opportunities to come into contact with those innate gods, giving them the opportunity to ask for advice from the innate gods that they would never have been able to come into contact with in the untainted world. Those innate gods might not necessarily have the patience to teach them, but as long as they gave them some pointers and revealed some things, these living beings would gain endless benefits. The disciples under Luo Fan were no exception. Except for Hong Jun, Guang Pu, Luo Fu, and Luo Chunyang in the endless starry sky, the others all entered the virtual world. Lei Jiuxiao, Guling, Lin Tiannan, and the three female innate gods who had entered the threshold of Luo Fan all cultivated directly when they heard the mantra recited by Luo Fan for the first time, so that their thoughts could be projected into the virtual world. These people were all cultivators who had been taught by Luo Fan. Their qualifications might not be the best among the many innate gods, but they definitely had a lot of knowledge. Therefore, they discovered many functions of the virtual world faster than other innate gods. They were also the first to find each other after the explanation of G2. In the primordial world, if the six of them wanted to gather in one place, they would need to make a lot of preparations and seize the right opportunity. They might not be able to find such an opportunity in thousands of years. However, in this virtual world, they only needed to establish a platform in the judgment rule of soul sense and establish a kind of rule. Then, they could easily gather and communicate with each other as if they were face to face. This convenient and novel change made the six of them inexplicably happy. Because of the communication, their feelings for each other deepened, and at the same time, their knowledge had increased a lot. Even their cultivation realm had improved a little. Master's thoughts are indeed something that we are unable to fathom. He was actually able to think of such a mysterious and magnificent virtual world. If it was me, even if my cultivation level was raised to Master's level, I'm afraid that I would not be able to think of this. On a certain day, 3 months later, Lin Tian-nan sighed as he faced the other 5 people on the platform. Before the virtual world was formed, Lin Tian-nan had never seen the other disciples under Luo Fan. He even rarely met Luo Fan. Subconsciously, he had a feeling that he had been forgotten by Luo Fan. Chapter 432. Of course, if teacher didn't have this ability, How could he have suppressed the untainted land and become unrivaled? Zhuge Luan said from the platform. This platform was formed by the judgment rules of the Spirit Stone and some other rules. Although it was illusory, the people who were connected to it felt it was real. After they connected their spiritual consciousness with other living beings using this method, a wide or narrow platform was formed in their minds. The people who were connected seemed to appear on this platform. They felt like they were facing each other. At this moment, Lei Jiuxiao, Guling, Lin Tiannan, Zhuge Luan, Tianyi, and Lu Xiao were all on the platform Lin Tiannan built. However, Lei Jiuxiao and Guling were cultivating with their eyes closed. Only Lin Tiannan and the three female innate gods who were not Luo Fan's disciples, but had become Luo Fan's disciples were chatting. Hearing Zhuge Luan's words, Lin Tiannan's eyes showed a look of longing. He was clearly thinking about Luo Fan's mighty image of suppressing the untainted land. After a long while, Lin Tiannan finally sighed and said, "It's a pity. Master once said that there will be a great calamity soon. I am responsible for the safety of billions of people, yet I can't always be under Master's tutelage." Zhuge Luan and the other two were innate gods. They were born with an innate aura. Because of this, even though the natural Tao physiques they formed couldn't be considered to be devastatingly beautiful, they each contained an extremely profound bearing. This temperament made them very attractive, even though they were not extremely beautiful. This was especially true for post-celestial beings. Hearing Lin Tiannan's words, Tianyi frowned. This caused Lin Tiannan, who was feeling emotional, to be slightly shaken. He recovered from his emotional state. However, he was determined. After he recovered, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. This kind of situation happened frequently. He already knew the reason and knew that it was not Tianyi's problem. Naturally, he would not say anything. Tian, he frowned and said, "You are so unsatisfied. The three of us can only be considered as teachers' disciples, and we can't even be considered as in-name disciples. Compared to us, what else do you have to be dissatisfied with?" When Lin Tiannan heard this, he remembered that Tianyi and the other two girls were in an awkward position. He hurriedly apologized. Tianyi and the other two naturally wouldn't be angry at Lin Tiannan. At most, they would just grumble and let it go. After a while, Zhuge Luan took the initiative to ask Lin Tiannan, "Just now, Tiannan, you said that you were responsible for the safety of billions of people. Is that true?" "Of course it's true. I ascended from a minor kiliacosm with Master's help, and the creatures that ascended from the minor kiliacosm were naturally handed over to me by Master. Over the past tens of thousands of years, they have been multiplying, and their number has already grown to billions." "So that's how it is," Zhuge Luan said in realization. As he spoke, he looked at Tianyi and Lu Xia and nodded, as if he had decided on something. When Lin Tiannan saw this, he faintly guessed in his heart and couldn't help but feel nervous. "Since Tiannan has so many creatures under you, the three of us would like to teach them. Is that possible?" After Zhuge Luan exchanged opinions with the other two, she directly asked Lin Tiannan, "Teach." When Lin Tiannan heard Zhuge Luan's words, his eyes suddenly widened. He couldn't believe his ears, even though they weren't using their ears to communicate. "That's right. Is there a problem?" Zhuge Luan asked when she saw Lin Tiannan's expression. When Lin Tiannan heard this, he hurriedly shook his head and said, "There is no problem. There is no problem. If teacher is willing to teach among them, Tiannan would only wish for it. If that's the case, then I can rest assured." When Zhuge Luan heard Lin Tiannan's words, a happy smile appeared on her face. Zhuge Luan, Tianyi, and Lu Xia had helped preside over Luo Fu and Guangpu's wedding, thus helping Panga's primordial spirit return to the great Tao and sharing the boundless fate. However, it was also because of this that they bore the karma of many innate gods who didn't inherit Pangu's primordial spirit. They had to work hard to teach in the untainted land and pass on the cultivation methods of the innate gods that would appear in the future. Only then could they cut off their karma and enjoy the fate. In order for them to have this ability, Luo Fan had specially taught them about the Tao and provided them with a long period of time in the minor Kiliacosm so that they could organize their Tao and organize their own cultivation knowledge. It seemed like everything had been prepared for the three of them. They were only waiting for the three of them to find innate gods to teach them. The three of them originally thought this way. It was also because of this that the three of them hurriedly left Buzhou Mountain after leaving the minor Kiliacosm. They walked around the untainted land in search of the newly born innate gods to teach them. At this moment, they had already gone to a valley that was billions of miles away from the untainted land. However, the result made the three of them feel disappointed. The number of innate gods in the untainted land was unimaginable, but they were so sparsely distributed in the whole untainted land. After another round of gathering by Luo Fan, the innate gods that were still in the untainted land were either muddle-headed and did not have a complete spiritual consciousness, or those that were still in the primordial chi source and had not yet fully evolved into their forms. Therefore, after so many years of traveling in the untainted land, the three of them actually didn't find any innate god who was willing to listen to them. They didn't find any innate god who was willing to accept their help. The appearance of this situation was beyond the three of them's expectations, and it gradually obliterated their originally soaring ambitions. Unknowingly, the three of them couldn't find a goal. They even felt that they didn't know where to start cultivating. The three of them were not the most powerful innate gods in the untainted land. They were not even one of the 100,000 innate gods selected by Luo Fan to rule the entire untainted land. However, they were still innate gods who had been taught various cultivation methods by Luo Fan and sorted out their own cultivation system with the help of Luo Fan. The depth of their understanding of themselves was no less than that of any other innate gods. In this situation where they couldn't find a goal, the three of them gradually realized that if this mentality continued, it would definitely affect their cultivation realm and might even slow down the progress of their cultivation. Therefore, in recent years, they had been trying hard to find living beings who could listen to them and accept their help. The establishment of the virtual world this time not only calmed the three of them down a little, but it also made them think of a method that could balance their mentality. At the same time, it would also be beneficial for them to teach the innate gods in the future and repay their karma. This method was mentioned before. It was to spread the Tao among the ascenders and their descendants. In Lin Tiannan's opinion, there were many benefits for Shizi Luan and the other two to preach to ascenders and their descendants. No matter what, Zhui Luan and the other two were innate gods at the peak of the itinerant immortal realm. Even if they weren't at the peak of the primordial world, they were still supreme existences to the ascenders and their descendants. As long as the three of them leaked something, it would be enough to feed the innate gods and their descendants until their intestines were full. This was extremely useful in reducing the pressure on Lin Tiannan. Back then, Lin Tiannan had begged Luo Fan to leave a path for the innate gods and their descendants to survive the great tribulation of the world. At that time, Luo Fan had also passed down the array that could only be formed by 1 billion living beings. However, in these few years, the number of people had multiplied by several times. Originally, the array formed by 1 billion living beings could only rely on the array to protect everyone. However, at this time, there were even more people that weren't included in the array. If that was the case, even if the array was extremely powerful, it would be much more dangerous than the person who set up the array. It was extremely likely that the person who couldn't set up the array would not be able to survive the great tribulation of the world. In these few years, after the population had exceeded 1 billion, Lin Tiannan had been tormented by this thought. The psychological pressure was so great that it had even affected the progress of his cultivation. At this time, he was still at the life-changing realm 5th stage and was unable to break through to the life-changing realm 6th stage. Not to mention breaking through to the heaven martial arts realm and attaining the earth immortal fruit. Because of this, after Lin Tiannan entered the virtual world, he acutely felt the great significance of this virtual world for the innate gods and their descendants. That was why he was so excited. However, although this virtual world could provide a powerful platform for the innate gods and their descendants, giving them a chance to increase their cultivation and knowledge, it was still just a platform and an opportunity. Compared to having an innate god personally enter and pass down the Tao, it was definitely a world of difference. The more Lin Tian thought about it, the more excited he became. In an instant, he felt the psychological pressure on him lessen by a lot. In the blink of an eye, he felt his mind become much more relaxed. Countless spiritual lights flashed continuously in his mind. Endless martial arts mysteries suddenly appeared out of nowhere from the depths of his memory. At this moment, Lin Tian Nan did not even have the time to greet Zun Wan and the others. The consciousness that had been projected into the mini Kiliacosm was directly sucked back into his physical body and returned to the primitive world, directly disappearing from the virtual world. This unexpected occurrence instantly alarmed Zun Wan and the others. Even Gu Ling and Lei Jiuxiao, who were cultivating with their eyes closed, instantly woke up from their meditation. They stood up with surprised and worried expressions on their faces. Although they had only interacted with Lin Tian Nan for a few months, they were all disciples of Luo Fan and called each other brothers. This determined that they had long been bound together, and naturally, it was extremely easy to cultivate feelings for each other. Now that they saw Lin Tian Nan suddenly disappear from the virtual world, how could they not be worried? After calling out for a while and receiving no response, the few of them discussed among themselves and then suppressed their worries. The few of them were all extremely knowledgeable and had a deep understanding of cultivation. They could definitely look down on other innate gods. Although Lin Tian Nan's previous change was sudden, there were still traces of aura faintly seeping out. After a round of deduction, they could tell that Lin Tian Nan's sudden disappearance was not an accident. It was extremely likely that he had suddenly comprehended something and had a breakthrough in his cultivation realm. However, although they had already deduced it, they were still unable to confirm it. Hence, after exchanging their opinions, they decided to maintain this connection and quietly wait for Lin Tian Nan's return in the virtual world so that they could ask Lin Tian Nan if he had comprehended something or if some accident had happened. Once Lin Tian Nan's consciousness returned to his body, he felt that he had lost control of the true qi in his body. It was automatically flowing in a very mysterious and complicated path. At the same time, there were countless martial theories that he could not think of and countless mysteries of heaven and earth that he could not understand. Everything quickly flowed through his mind. It was as if he was looking at the lines on his palm. Clear, clear, the light of wisdom filled his mind. In an instant, Lin Tiannan knew what was happening. It was clearly a sign that he was breaking through from the life-changing realm to the life-changing realm to the life-changing realm. What Lin Tiannan cultivated was the martial way. Gathering qi, life-changing, and sky martial arts were the three realms in the martial scripture created by Luo Fan. Among them, gathering qi was the most basic. It gathered the endless qi of heaven and earth and broke through the limits of martial arts. As for fate changing, it was to break through the limits of martial arts after the spirit gathering. It was to go deep into the source of life and change the destiny of heaven, allowing the cultivator, who was originally just a postnatal living being, to attain the earthly immortal Tao fruit like the innate gods. Life-changing was divided into 9 realms. Every level was a huge change. Every level of cultivation represented a change in heaven's will. His true qi and divine abilities would increase by several times or even dozens of times. The 5th realm of life changing was the boundary of the 9 realms of life changing. Before the 5th realm of life changing, no matter how high a cultivator's cultivation was, no matter how pure and vast the true qi in their body was, they were still a post-celestial being. There were still countless impurities and impurities. These impurities were not necessarily useless to the body. They were ingested after birth and were originally created after birth in their bodies. But after breaking through the fifth realm of life, changing to the sixth realm of life changing, the cultivator's body would no longer contain any post-celestial substances. Their body would become extremely pure. The inside and outside of their body would become one, clear and bright like a piece of transparent glass. They would truly have a body and aptitude comparable to a god. It could be said that after the cultivator broke through the fifth realm of life, changing to the sixth realm of life changing, they would have broken free from the shackles of post-celestial beings and could no longer be called a post-celestial being. From then on, walking in the air, moving mountains and seas, flying without a trace, going up into the sky and down into the earth, and other techniques that could be done with the help of martial arts would become instinctive. Their bodies would also have all sorts of unimaginable divine abilities, possessing all sorts of unimaginable power. This change was so great that it was almost like going from a human to a god, an entire cultivation of the great realm of life changing. The significance of this change was no less than breaking through the ninth realm of life, changing to the sky martial realm. Knowing that he had broken through the bottleneck of the fifth realm of life changing, Lin Tiannan's heart calmed down. He had been looking forward to this process for thousands of years. He had been looking forward to this breakthrough ever since he reached the fifth realm of life changing. Back then, when Luo Fan placed the lives of the 1 billion ascenders and their descendants on Lin Tiannan's shoulders, Lin Tiannan felt a strong pressure at the beginning, but at the same time, it also gave him a strong motivation to cultivate. This motivation caused his cultivation to advance by leaps and bounds, allowing him to break through several realms in a very short period of time, directly reaching the fifth realm of life changing. But at the same time, this pressure also caused him to be lacking in strength. This caused him to be stuck at the fifth realm of life changing for thousands of years. No matter how hard he tried, he could not find a way to break through. He could only cultivate the cultivation method that Luo Fan passed on to him day after day, year after year, and comprehend the martial scripture that Luo Fan had left in his memory. During this process, the pressure of not being able to break through increased the pressure on his soul. A few thousand years was nothing in the cultivation of the martial path. It was not that Lin Tiannan had never tried staying at a realm for thousands of years. But that was not when the great tribulation of heaven and earth was about to descend in a few thousand years. This kind of pressure and responsibility for the lives of billions of living beings was enough to crush any living being. Although Lin Tiannan was not crushed, he could not be as carefree and content as he was at other times at this moment, knowing that he had broken through the bottleneck of the fifth realm of life changing and was about to reach the sixth realm of life changing. Lin Tiannan felt extremely happy and at the same time indescribably calm. It was as if at this moment the pressure of the lives of billions of living beings had disappeared. This kind of relaxation, this kind of contentment made Lin Tiannan feel incomparably comfortable. At the same time, there was also incomparable nostalgia. This kind of contentment, this kind of comfort was something that he had not enjoyed for thousands of years. A faint smile appeared on Lin Tiannan's face. The circulation of the true energy in his body gradually changed in a strange way. At the same time, the quality of the true energy also changed in a mysterious and unpredictable way. Countless colorful smoke gradually seeped out from various parts of his body during this process, gradually spreading out. Under the impact of the surrounding yuan qi, it gradually dispersed in all directions. Every time this colorful smoke seeped out, Lin Tiannan's body seemed to become much lighter. Every time a little of the smoke disappeared, Lin Tiannan's body became more crystal clear. Chapter 433. Returning true qi to origin, removing impurities from the flesh at this moment. The amount of multicolored smoke that came out of Lin Tiannan's body seemed to be endless, radiating in all directions. Lin Tiannan's current location was the cave that he had invited Luo Fan to visit. Because of Lin Tiannan's extraordinary status among the Ascenders and their descendants, No one dared to set up their own cave within 1,000 miles of this cave. Although the smoke continued to radiate in all directions, it had completely merged with the air after reaching 1,000 miles away. It had completely assimilated with the Xiantian Yuan Qi in the air and could no longer be found. To the warriors and cultivators who had set up their cave 1,000 miles away from Lin Tian, they only felt that the Yuan Qi in the air was slightly denser and easier to absorb. At most, they felt that the energy of the heavens and earth had increased, but they couldn't tell that this was caused by Lin Tian. Lin Tian's body gradually changed within the multicolored smoke. Although the color didn't change, it seemed to be more transparent and clear. His entire body slowly left the praying mat and floated in the air as if he was weightless. Wave after wave of mysterious fluctuations were emitted from his body. It was as if there was something extremely mysterious growing inside his body. The multicolored smoke that came out of Lin Tian's body was the Hotian substance that had been unable to be expelled from his body for a long time. This Hotian substance was brought from Lin Tian's mother's womb and grew with him over the past tens of thousands of years. It also improved along with his cultivation of martial arts. Today, when Lin Tian reached the 5th stage of life-changing, this Hotian substance contained an unimaginable amount of energy. This energy was refined from the endless Xiantian Yuan Qi. It was originally energy that had been purified by the body and was most suitable for warriors and cultivators to absorb and cultivate. At the same time, the essence of these substances did not change, even though they had absorbed so much Xiantian Yuan Qi. It was still a Hotian substance. It was still an existence that prevented Lin Tian from surpassing the limits of the Hotian realm and transcending the boundaries of martial arts. If this kind of existence was not eliminated, no matter how much Lin Tian cultivated, he would never be able to truly transcend martial arts. He would never be able to truly attain Dao fruit. Under Luo Fan's tutelage, no matter how high one's cultivation was when one attained the Dao, one had to attain the earthly, immortal Dao fruit. If he didn't even have the qualifications to obtain the fruit of Dao, then Lin Tian wouldn't have the qualifications to be Luo Fan's disciple. Thus, to Lin Tian, these Hotian substances that were beneficial to other cultivators and could greatly increase their strength, he had no choice but to exclude them from his body. As the smoke was expelled, the true qi in Lin Tian's body underwent countless mysterious and indescribable changes. It was as if some kind of mysterious and indescribable power had been added to the true qi, giving it many unique characteristics that it didn't have before. Lin Tian's mind was immersed in the martial scripture, relying on the mysterious state of mind brought about by his breakthrough. He worked hard to comprehend the countless martial arts principles that he had never been able to understand in order to increase his own martial arts realm. To Lin Tian, getting rid of the acquired substances wasn't just a benefit. After all, these acquired substances had already supported Lin Tian's life for tens of thousands of years. To expel them from his body was to directly harm his foundation. As the smoke dispersed, Lin Tian's body began to shrink at a speed visible to the naked eye. In a short while, all that was left was a skinny skeleton. It was as if his flesh and blood had been completely turned into smoke and expelled. Behind this skinny skeleton, the colorful smoke continued to disperse from his body. The energy contained in this colorful smoke was even more powerful and shocking. In this process, Lin Tian's skinny skeleton began to shrink. His originally 1.8 meters tall body had shrunk to less than 50 centimeters after a few dozen breaths. He looked like an infant. Moreover, it was a skinny infant. It gave people a rather strange feeling. At this time, the true qi in Lin Tian's body suddenly exploded. A Xiantian aura that only a Xiantian god possessed was emitted from his true qi. The moment this Xiantian aura was emitted, the true qi quickly condensed and compressed. From its original state of filling his meridians and dantian, it was compressed more than 100 times. In the end, it became a small stream that flowed unhurriedly within his wide meridians. As it flowed, the smoke emitted from Lin Tian Nan's body rolled out like a shockwave from a bomb exploding. It rushed in all directions and surged around the cave. Countless decorations and furniture were knocked over, and some were even directly smashed into pieces. This wave of smoke was like the final radiance of a setting sun. After it appeared, no more smoke rushed out from Lin Tian Nan's body. Lin Tian Nan's body floated 3 feet above the praying mat. His body gradually emitted a fluorescent light. This fluorescent light was crystal clear and incomparably warm. It seemed to contain the endless mysteries of the universe. It also seemed to be a pure light that was born naturally and could evolve into all things in the world. This light flickered for a long time before gradually disappearing without a trace. On Lin Tian Nan's body, there was a faint, almost undetectable Xiantian aura. This kind of Xiantian aura was faintly discernible, as if it was separated by a layer. It was not emitted from his body, but was hidden within his body. Lin Tian Nan slowly separated himself from that godly state of mind. His mind left the martial scripture, and a faint smile appeared on his face. If this smile was any other time, it would definitely make people feel happy and pleasing to the eye. However, when it appeared on Lin Tian Nan's face, it was very strange, because at this moment Lin Tian Nan was like a skinny infant. He was unimaginably small and weak, so weak that any kind creature would feel pity for him. Lin Tian Nan's thoughts moved, and the water essence that was mixed with the endless Xiantian Yuan qi quickly condensed. In the blink of an eye, it condensed into a 3 feet wide round mirror in front of him, and his figure was reflected in the round mirror. Seeing the extremely thin and weak infant appearance in front of him, although Lin Tian had already expected this, he still could not help but tremble. I can't believe that after cultivating for so many years, my body's Xiantian nature is still only this much. This kind of emotion flashed through his mind. With another thought, the round mirror in front of him slowly collapsed, once again turning into water essence and dissipating into the air. In a moment, the Xiantian Yuan qi had completely absorbed it. At this moment, Lin Tian Nan had already steadily stepped into the 6th stage of life-changing realm. He did not need to use any true qi, nor did he need to use any martial arts to have all kinds of unimaginable abilities. This kind of ability to condense water essence into a mirror and then dissipate it as he pleased was naturally an extremely easy thing to do. With a thought, Lin Tian Nan revolved the true qi in his body. Endless Xiantian Yuan qi quickly condensed towards him, surging out from all the acupuncture points in his body and into his meridians. At this moment, it was completely crushed by the true qi in his meridians. Finally, it became a power that was tens of thousands of times smaller and was absorbed into his true qi, causing his true qi to grow slightly. Feeling the change in the true qi in his body, Lin Tian Nan instantly knew. Although Xiantian Yuan qi was still useful to his cultivation, it was much less useful than before. If he wanted to quickly increase his true qi and allow his body to grow to a normal size, he needed to absorb a higher level of Yuan qi. In this world, the Yuan qi that was of a higher level than Xiantian Yuan qi was naturally chaotic Yuan qi. Lin Tian then thought about it for a moment and made a decision. With a thought, the true qi in his body slightly revolved and his body changed slightly. Following this, his entire body sank into the ground like a shadow. With a speed that was comparable to a normal martial artist's flying speed, he went underground. What Lin Tian Nan was currently using was an earth-burrowing martial art. Its power was powerful and mysterious. At Lin Tian Nan's current level of martial arts, flying through the sky and burrowing through the earth was just a piece of cake. Lin Tian Nan had already learned this kind of burrowing technique a long time ago. This time, after his breakthrough, he had comprehended many more mysteries of burrowing through the ground from the martial scripture. His current speed of burrowing through the earth was more than 100 times faster than before. Because of this, He could use this type of earth-burrowing martial art. After all, after he reached the sixth stage of life-changing realm, his body naturally contained the ability to fly through the sky and burrow through the earth. It was just that he had just broken through and had yet to fully develop the various powers of his body that could eliminate acquired matter. Naturally, his ability to fly through the sky and burrow through the earth could not be compared to his earth-burrowing martial art. Lin Tiannan's earth-burrowing martial art was extremely fast. Not long after, he arrived at a place filled with chaotic yuan qi. That was the nest of the tortoise-shaped innate god, qi. When the turtle-shaped innate god was invited by Luo Fan again, he was still cultivating in the same place. Although the chaotic qi of vitality was almost consumed, it had been naturally generated and condensed over the years, so it had accumulated quite a lot. Although it was not much, it was enough for Lin Tiannan to cultivate. This place was quite crowded for the tortoise-shaped innate god, but for Lin Tiannan, it was extremely spacious. When he landed, he casually gathered the fire essence contained in the surrounding innate energies, and a 3-inch ball of light appeared in the palm of his hand. A dim light was emitted from the ball of light and illuminated the surroundings. Although it was very dim, it was enough for Lin Tiannan to see the entire space clearly. This space was filled with gray fog and appeared very hazy. Strands of chaotic yuan qi slowly seeped out from the ground around this space and continuously entered this spacious space. It joined the gray fog and caused the gray fog to become thicker. There is indeed some chaotic yuan qi remaining. Lin Tiannan was very happy when he saw this. Without stopping, he let go of the ball of light in his hand and let it float around. His body sat cross-legged in the air and slowly circulated the inner qi in his body. At the same time, he carefully followed the mysterious mantra in his mind. Following his actions, the surrounding gray fog gradually began to move. Like a stream of water, it gathered towards Lin Tiannan's body and entered the acupuncture points on his body. The moment the chaotic yuan qi entered his acupuncture points, he suddenly trembled and felt an indescribable feeling of comfort emerge from the depths of his mind. A strong instinctive desire urged him to let go of everything and absorb more chaotic yuan qi. However, at the same time as this feeling of comfort appeared, an indescribable pain appeared in his body out of nowhere. This kind of pain felt as if his entire body was being torn apart, crushed, and ground into powder starting from his acupuncture points. This kind of pain caused Lin Tiannan's mind to tremble uncontrollably, and he was almost unable to control his mind. Lin Tiannan had been training hard these past few years, and his accumulation of martial arts knowledge had surpassed almost all living beings. When this kind of contradictory feeling appeared, he immediately understood what was going on. The appearance of this situation was clearly because his body had already been completely rid of the acquired substance, but it was still not an innate body. This kind of unbearable pain was caused by the chaotic energy dispersing into his muscles and bones during the process of passing through his acupuncture points, constantly transforming his body. This kind of pain came from the source of his life. It was the pain of his life source being changed. It did not affect Lin Tiannan's body, but Lin Tiannan's soul. Only this kind of pain could cause someone as determined as Lin Tiannan to feel an unbearable feeling. This kind of pain would only appear in Lin Tiannan's current body state. If he had already obtained an innate body, his body would no longer need to be changed by the chaotic yuan qi. Naturally, he would not feel this kind of pain. However, if he still did not get rid of the acquired substance in his body, he would still have an acquired body. When the chaotic yuan qi entered his body, he would only feel bloated. When he sent out again, he naturally would not feel this kind of pain. Lin Tiannan understood the reason and suppressed the desire in his heart. He slowed down the speed at which he absorbed the chaotic yuan qi, allowing the strands of chaotic yuan qi to slowly pass through the acupuncture points in his body and enter his meridians. The chaotic yuan qi in his body had already undergone a transformation and contained an innate aura. The chaotic yuan qi was crushed by the chaotic yuan qi and finally completely integrated into the chaotic yuan qi, becoming a part of the chaotic yuan qi. The quality of the chaotic yuan qi was many times higher than that of the innate yuan qi. The same amount of chaotic yuan qi could increase the true qi by tens of times. Just this one absorption caused the true qi in Lin Tiannan's body to increase by more than 10%. Lin Tiannan felt the increase in the true qi in his body, but he felt pain and happiness at the same time. How great would it be if there was no such pain? Lin Tiannan sighed to himself. However, he could only continue to absorb the primal chaos yuan qi that was gathering around his body. He endured the terrifying pain caused by the primal chaos yuan qi entering his body and enjoyed the joy brought by the rapid growth of his true qi. Although he had already gotten rid of all the acquired substances in his body from the 5th stage of life, changing to the 6th stage of life changing, he would not be able to have an innate body until the 9th stage of life changing. Therefore, it could be predicted that for a long time, every time he absorbed chaotic yuan qi to cultivate, he would have to endure this kind of pain that went deep into his soul. How could Lin Tiannan not sigh at this tragic fate that he could foresee? Even so, Lin Tiannan did not retreat. He did not have the slightest intention of not absorbing chaotic yuan qi to increase his true qi, but absorbing innate yuan qi to increase his cultivation. This was because he knew that although absorbing innate yuan qi could relieve the pain, the effect of absorbing innate yuan qi on the growth of his true qi was too small. Moreover, without this kind of pain, he would not be able to refine his body during the process of absorbing yuan qi. He would need to slowly refine his body with true qi until his body became an innate body. The difficulty of this was tens of thousands of times greater than absorbing chaotic yuan qi. It could be said that if Lin Tiannan could break through a realm in 1,000 years by absorbing chaotic yuan qi, he would need 100,000 years to break through a realm by absorbing innate yuan qi. This kind of choice to slow down the speed of cultivation in order to avoid the pain was not something Lin Tiannan could choose to do. It was also not something he had the right to choose. After sighing, Lin Tiannan stopped the circulation of his true qi. With a thought, he silently recited the mantra that Luo Fan had spread to every corner of the ancient wasteland. There was some kind of mysterious law acting on his body. In an instant, he felt as if he had passed through an infinite amount of time and space, crossed an infinite distance, and arrived in a completely new world. He was directly projected into the virtual world. Lin Tiannan's position in the virtual world was on a planet. The body that Lin Tiannan's consciousness projected into the virtual world was that of a giant ape that was 10 feet tall. Its appearance was somewhat similar to that of a skinny baby. After Lin Tiannan entered this body, he did not hesitate. With a thought, he connected to the platform where Zhuge Luan and the others were on. His consciousness projected the figures of Lei Jiuxiao, Gu Ling, Zhuge Luan, Tian Yi, and Zuoli. At this time, Lei Jiuxiao and the others also felt Lin Tiannan's arrival. They all let out a sigh of relief. Seeing their expressions, Lin Tiannan knew that they were worried about him. His heart was filled with gratitude and shame at the same time. He hurriedly went forward to ask for forgiveness. Chapter 434. Chapter 474, Chapter FOUR Spiritual Awareness Network, Mutation. Although Lin Tiannan was grateful for the others' concern, he still said, "I still need a few more years to recover my body, but I'm not in a hurry. Teachers, the matter of passing down the Tao is more important." Mu Shulwan immediately said, "It's not that important. It's only a few years. To us, it's just a small matter." Tian Yi, Lu Xia, and the others naturally did not refute Mu Shulwan. They only nodded, but no one knew what they were thinking. Speaking of this, Lei Jiuxiao and Gu Ling naturally could not say anything else. They could only watch from the side. Lin Tiannan smiled and shook his head. "Even if my cultivation is interrupted for a while, it won't affect me much. Teachers, you don't have to worry." Seeing that Lin Tian Nan was so determined, Mu Shuan and the others could only nod in agreement. Seeing that they had already nodded, Lin Tian Nan was quite happy. With a thought, billions of living beings suddenly appeared in his mind. These were the post-celestial beings and their descendants that had ascended from the small thousand world. There weren't many barriers to entry in the virtual world, and it was naturally the best form of entertainment for many living beings who had very few entertainment facilities. Hence, most of the ascenders and their descendants were in the virtual world at all times. Lin Tian Nan had an extremely high status among all the ascenders and their descendants. When they set up the rules to determine who was in the virtual world, they naturally wouldn't isolate Lin Tian Nan. Because of this, Lin Tian Nan was able to easily contact everyone in the virtual world at the same time. Lin Tian Nan was currently only at the 6th stage of the life-changing realm. There was still a huge gap between him and Spikes. With his spiritual awareness, he naturally could not keep the spiritual awareness of so many living beings in one place for too long. Thus, after connecting with the many living beings, he did not wait for them to greet him. Instead, he used simple words to clearly explain why he was connecting with so many living beings. Then he immediately cut off the connection with the many living beings. Although it was only for a short period of time, less than 10 seconds, Lin Tian Nan already felt quite tired. He even felt mentally and physically exhausted. He sat there and panted for a long time before he could catch his breath. Although Lin Tian Nan's explanation was concise, he clearly explained the problem. Every ascender and descendant who received Lin Tian Nan's consciousness knew what was going on. They also knew what benefits this matter would bring to them. As Lin Tian Nan sat in the deepest part of the forest on the planet, gasping for breath, a cheer reverberated in Lin Tian Nan's spiritual sense. Although Lin Tian Nan had already cut off his connection with these creatures, it did not mean that others would not contact him. Especially in a situation where they were excited, there were naturally many people who could not help but connect their joy to Lin Tian Nan and vent the joy in their hearts to him. Even though most of them were blocked by Lin Tian Nan's spiritual sense judgment, there were still some that were allowed by Lin Tian Nan's judgment. Naturally, there were many cheers echoing in his mind. Fortunately, there weren't many of them. To him, it was not too much pressure. Thus, he only smiled and let it go. After catching his breath, Lin Tian Nan once again connected to the platform that Zhuge Luan and the others had set up. He told Zhuge Luan about what had happened and how to contact the other living beings. He also transmitted the auras of those living beings to Zhuge Luan, Tian Yi, and Lu Xia. It was only a few billion auras. Even for Lin Tian Nan, it was not too much pressure, let alone the three of them who had already reached the peak of the itinerant immortal realm. After receiving these auras, the three of them immediately contacted the creatures according to the aura index. Through various methods, they selected ascenders and ascendant descendants who were suitable to cultivate the Tao that the three of them passed down. This was a rather large project, but the three of them were quite satisfied with it. They were quite happy, and it was no longer Lin Tian Nan's business. Lin Tian Nan sensed the joy from the three of them and knew that it was a success. He smiled and bid farewell to Lei Jiuxiao and Guling. Then he left the virtual world and returned to his real body, the body of a skinny infant. After returning to his real body, he could finally focus on cultivating and replenish the damage to his body. However, at the same time, it also meant that he would have to experience the pain that came from every part of his body for the next few years, or even decades. He sighed. He circulated his true qi and began to absorb the gray mist-like chaotic origin energy in his surroundings. The chaotic origin energy flowed into his body like needles through his acupoints. While he enjoyed the indescribable pain, it slowly increased his true qi, which already contained the aura of the innate realm. Time slowly passed by. During this process, Lin Tian Nan's body slowly became full and plump. The image of a bag of bones gradually disappeared and was replaced by an extremely healthy baby. Although he wasn't fat, he wasn't thin and weak either. By the time Lin Tian Nan's original skinny appearance had become like this, 3 years had already passed. On this day, Lin Tian Nan finally stopped circulating his true qi for 3 years. A relaxed and joyful expression appeared on his face. That relaxed and joyful expression was clearly the relaxation and joy of returning to the human world from hell. The emotions that were emitted in that instant were enough to turn any creature that was in extreme pain into joy and complete the reversal of the two extremes. After relaxing and joyful for a while, Lin Tian Nan waved his hand, and the water essence in the air directly condensed into a round mirror with a diameter of 1 foot in front of him. The entire process was many times more natural than when he had just reached the 6th stage of life-changing. Moreover, the condensed round mirror seemed more real, more compact, and more natural. Raising his head to look at the round mirror, the relaxed and joyful expression on his face instantly collapsed and turned into a helpless expression. That pink and jade-like infant that seemed to have walked out of New Year's painting was so ironic. If it wasn't for the fact that it looked relatively healthy, Lin Tian Nan would have suspected that the endless pain that he had endured for the past 3 years was in vain. It's still just an infant. To grow back to its original size, I'm afraid it will still take more than 10 years. When will it end? Lin Tian Nan lamented in his heart. But it was only a lamentation. With his heart of Tao, he would not give up because of this almost unbearable pain and this almost non-existent growth process. At this moment, the true qi in his meridians had completely recovered. It was so full that there was not a single gap left in his meridians. As the true qi flowed, there seemed to be the sound of crashing waves coming from within. His entire body was like a clear and transparent piece of glass. His true qi flowed freely without any impurities. An indescribable fragrance came from his body. Although he was only in the shape of an infant, he emitted an indescribable aura. It was as if he could explode with unimaginable destructive power with just a wave of his hand, as if he could even change the world. In these 3 years, he had been cultivating the martial scripture at every moment. The 6th stage of life-changing had also been completely stabilized by him in these 3 years. The reason why his body could go from being a bag of bones to being so full was because in the process of absorbing the chaotic yuan qi, there was chaotic yuan qi constantly dissipating throughout his body. This dissipation not only tempered his body, but also caused many of the substances that his body needed to naturally evolve from the chaotic yuan qi. Bit by bit, his body was replenished, allowing his originally exhausted body to gradually recover to a healthy and complete state. At this moment, he was able to regain his senses because his body had already recovered to a healthy state. Although the pain did not make him give up on continuing to cultivate, Lin Tian Nan did not want to immediately enter the state of cultivation. With a slight thought, the mantra to enter the virtual world slowly flowed through his mind and consciousness. It was as if he had passed through an infinite amount of time and space. Then he felt that he had another body. It was the body of an ape that was 10 feet tall. It was curled up in the depths of a forest on a planet. As he entered this body, the body trembled a few times and the sound of dust falling to the ground could be heard. As he moved, he shook the thick layer of carapace-like dust that had accumulated on the surface of his body over the past 36 years, causing the dust to fall to the ground. I really can't tell that this is a virtual world. Lin Tian Nan stood up and felt the slightly stiff feeling that came from his body that had not moved for 36 years. The sound of birds chirping could be heard. This forest was many times more lively than it was 36 years ago. It was full of life. There were countless creatures that Lin Tian Nan had seen before, and some that he had never seen before living in the forest. Everything seemed so real, and there was not a single hint of awkwardness. After moving his body and feeling his stiff body quickly become smooth and flexible, Lin Tian Nan sat down cross-legged again. With a thought, he connected with Zue Luan and the others. At this moment, an incomparably vast platform appeared in his mind. This platform was boundless and seemed to be transparent as it floated in the void of the universe. The platform's surroundings, below and above, were all nothingness. Countless stars hung in the distance, twinkling as if they were talking about something. It was as if they were talking about the mysteries of the universe. Standing on this platform, there was a desolate, mysterious, and unfathomable aura rushing towards him. His entire person seemed to have become sacred. "What is this?" Lin Tian Nan was extremely shocked. "Tian Nan is here. It seems that you have completed a portion of your cultivation." At this moment, a pleasant and leisurely voice of a woman entered Lin Tian Nan's ears. Then a figure stepped out of the void and appeared in front of Lin Tian Nan. That was the Zue Luan. After the Zue Luan appeared, a few more people appeared in front of Lin Tian Nan. They were Tian Yi, Lu Xia, Lei Jiuxiao, and Guling. When they saw each other, they were naturally very happy. After chatting for a while, Lin Tian Nan finally had the time to ask what was going on with this platform that seemed like the real universe in front of him. Why does this look like a virtual world? Could it be that the teachers changed the rules of this virtual world and connected it to their own spiritual senses? After Lin Tian Nan finished asking, he voiced out his feelings and guesses. Of course not. Apart from the fact that the virtual world that the teacher created is virtual, everything else is so real. It is almost like a primitive world. With our abilities, it is impossible to even touch the depths of this virtual world. So how could we change the rules of space? This is still a platform formed by the spiritual senses. However, it is also possible to say that it is a virtual world. It is just a virtual world that is based on the teacher's virtual world and built on our spiritual sense network. The Zueilwan smiled as she explained. As she spoke, she raised her hand and grabbed at the air. This boundless space that was like another virtual world quickly changed. In the blink of an eye, it changed into the narrow platform that they had formed when they first met. Then it changed again. It turned into a tall mountain, then into a cave. There were tables, chairs, benches, and all kinds of furniture and decorations. It made Lin Tian Nan feel like he was visiting a friend's cave. Lin Tian Nan's face revealed a look of understanding and shock. He came to a sudden understanding of the nature of this change, and he was shocked that the laws of judgment could actually reach such an extent. This had completely exceeded his imagination, and even though he knew the source of all this, he still felt extremely shocked. This was Lin Tian Nan's lack of knowledge. If Luo Fan was here, he would not be so shocked. It should be known that in Luo Fan's previous life, there was no magical power or supernatural power in that world. It was only based on the opening and closing of a switch. Yet another complex world that existed only in the computer was created in comparison. How could the rules of judgment be limited to simple changes like the opening and closing of a switch? To be able to create this kind of effect that was like another virtual world, it was very natural. After the shock, Lin Tian Nan became excited again. Since the rules of judgment could reach such a level, how interesting would the spiritual sense network formed by billions of people be? It was easy to imagine how many miraculous things could be found in it. Thinking of this, Lin Tian Nan could not wait to immediately start roaming the spiritual sense network. Seeing Lin Tian Nan's performance, Zue Luan and the others smiled at each other. They understood Lin Tian Nan's thoughts. Although they had seen the spiritual sense network go from being simple and crude to being as rich as the real world, even now, when they thought of the spiritual sense network being able to do such miraculous things, they were still eager to try it out. They wanted to know all the wonders of the spiritual sense network, let alone Lin Tian Nan. The few of them chatted in the cave. They talked about the changes in the virtual world in the past 36 years, as well as the results of Zue Luan and the other two's teachings to the Ascenders and their descendants. As Lin Tian Nan listened to their narration, he felt as if he had missed out on many wonderful legends. From time to time, he would wring his hands and sigh, but from time to time, he would be indescribably happy. 36 years was an extremely short period of time for many living beings in the great desolate world. Normally, If one did not even have the time to start cultivating a type of magical power or spell, 36 years would have already passed. However, for a magical and novel existence like the spiritual sense network, it was already enough for it to go from nothing to almost complete. Now, the entire spiritual sense network had already established a set of standards that were thousands of times more complicated than the simple standards that G2 had mentioned. This set of standards naturally could not compare to the 1 in a billion that Luo Fan had established regarding the rules of the virtual world. However, compared to the IP protocol standards that Luo Fan knew of in his previous life, it was tens of thousands of times more perfect. Under this set of standards, the entire spiritual sense network had already become completely orderly. Any living being under this set of standards could establish their own small world, turning all kinds of inconceivable and crazy ideas in their hearts into alternative realities that others could feel. During this process, there was even an innate god who had refined a crude magic tool that had simple thinking and did not have much defensive power. This crude magic tool did not have any offensive power, nor any defensive power. It did not even have any auxiliary functions. However, it had an extremely magical characteristic, and that was that it could cultivate the mantra to communicate with the virtual world. As long as the refiner refined this mantra into its simple thinking while refining, the magic tool could enter the virtual world at any time. It could also build a fixed platform in the spiritual sense network at any time. It was like a public place, providing many living beings that conform to the rules of the platform to communicate with each other. After this magic tool was invented, it became very popular in the Great Desolate World in an extremely short period of time. Unfortunately, although it was simple to refine, it still required living beings that had attained the Tao to refine it. Thus, in the Great Desolate World, there were currently only over 100,000 of these magic tools. Naturally, it was impossible for all living beings that had attained the Tao to do so. It was already very shocking that there were over 100,000 of these magic tools. As a result, there were only 100,000 fixed platforms in the spiritual sense network at the moment. Hearing this fact, Lin Tiannan's eyes brightened. With his sharp and quick-witted mind, he instantly thought of the possible impact this magic tool would have on the spiritual sense network. With this magic tool, the spiritual sense network could then be fixed and completely become an objective reality. It would no longer exist based on idealism. If I am here, it exists. If I am not here, it does not exist. This is idealism. Teacher, do you know the method to refine this magic tool? Can you teach me? Lin Tian then immediately asked the Tree Yuan. The Tree Yuan smiled slightly and said, "This magic tool is not a secret. I have also refined a few of them." As she spoke, she reached out and a book condensed out of thin air, appearing in front of Lin Tianan.